Hey, gang. Yeah, it's weird, huh? It's 5 o'clock, so I'm an hour earlier than I normally do. I understand. Oh, did I change my YouTube thing? Yes, good, 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 good. Um, Whenever I change up my routine or my schedule, odds are I forget something that I normally do. So I have like this routine. Um, so about an hour before stream, well, it starts earlier than that. So about noon, 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock ish, right? I check and make sure everyone that I have booked for the day is planning on coming. Then I put out a tweet about it and let people know what is happening that day, right? Whom I'm talking to, what the topic is, etc. And then about an hour before I go live, I do the Twitch, Kick, and YouTube thing. I get them all set up so that when I click the buttons, it all comes up seamlessly. Um, However, as I said, I sometimes when we change up the order of events or the timing of things, I'll mess up and get some things wrong. But it looks like, at least this time, I did not. It, so far, right? So far, everything seems to be going as planned. Testy Johnson, I'm the greatest. Well, you are one of the greatest. There are many greatests in my community, okay? Many. Several. Tons, if you will. But I wanted to, go live a little early. My guest isn't coming until 5:30. I have two guests today, okay? We're at least two. So we're going to have Dario at 5:30, and we're going to be talking about open borders, immigration, things like that. He's going to sell me on open borders. He's going to explain what he means by that. He's going to explain how it works, and he's going to tell me, right, why it's something that we should advocate for and work towards. As someone who is pro-immigration, I do want to bring in and streamline the process to get and become a legal citizen of this country. I have some hangups. I am skeptical about open borders, not the least of which people are, I don't want to say obfuscating what it is, but there is a lot of failure to address my concerns by so-called advocates of open borders that I want to really talk about. Um, I don't know if it's simply the fact that they're used to just everyone in their circles knowing what they mean exactly. Because I don't. Like when someone tells me they want open borders, I don't know what they mean. I mean, I can guess at generalities, right? I can guess, but I've talked to a few people who claim to advocate for open borders who have had radically different ideas of what that meant. Um, One person literally means, like, again, all the controls, the border controls that we have, the ports of entry, etc., the security along the border, get rid of it, reinvest it into policing within the country, and therefore, like all the money we spend on border patrolling should be spent instead on policing within the country, and that will solve the issue, right? And there won't be an issue of people coming in. So I've had people advocate for that. I've also had people advocate saying, no, 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 no. We still want ports of entry, points of entry. We still are going to require documentation when you come into this country just to make sure you're not on a terrorist watch list. All we want is that if you don't have, or if you're not a criminal, if you don't have a record or anything like that, you're able to just come in and move here and live here, right? Some people say, well, that should also give you the right to vote and access to the infrastructure that the country gives in total. Some people say in part. So again, I really have to interrogate what someone means when they say open borders. And it's been frustrating to me how many people have gaslit me about this, right? Saying, oh, everyone means the same exact thing. But I've talked to three different people and they've all had three different ideas on what this is, right? And by people, I mean actual people, not Twitter people. I want to be clear. But yeah, it is what it is. And I just hopefully Dario can come on and tell me what he means, and then we can have a discussion from that point of view. But Portland is burning. Hello, welcome. No Cal Mike, nice to see you. Jenny Burns, always a pleasure. Always a pleasure. Concluding postscript. Hello, hello, hello. Who else is in our chats today? I know we're early, so I appreciate you coming here. Riska, hi. We just closed our border with Russia. There's a huge difference if you look at this from American perspective. Yeah, that's the other thing, right? People always point to the EU as having open borders. No, they don't. They have open borders within the EU. But if you are coming from a non-signatory nation, right? Someone who didn't join I forget the name of the pact that they made, it's not open borders, right? So again, I just wish people would be honest with me about what they're advocating for. Temperance Quill, hello. Nice to see you. Good to have you with us today. I know, right, that we have a lot to talk about today. I know we have a lot going on, and I'm really hoping we can kind of get into it and have a wonderful, productive discussion. Have you guys been enjoying the content lately? Who all saw yesterday's show? Just ask Kidology, she'll tell me. Ask Kidology about what? Open borders? I mean, if she wants to come talk about open borders with me, she's more willing. I didn't know she had a stance on this, to be honest with you. Maybe I'm wrong. Tessie Johnson says, it's certainly streamlined, which is pretty dope. Line is way shorter. Commonwealth needs to streamline their shit as well for my convenience. Let's go. No Cow Mike says, the fact that people say Biden has open border policy pretty much shows entire discourse on this issue is poisoned. Yes, I mean, we do not have an open border in this country, in America, to be specific. We have border control. We have what's called a controlled border. And again, just saying controlled border doesn't really tell you anything, right? We have a system where there is different ways that you can get visas or apply to become a citizen with this country. We have quotas, like we only take so many of different types. Like we have so many marriage quotas, for example, right? A marriage quota where we allow so many people to apply, etc. I'm not sure on the details, but I don't claim to be an expert, and I'm not advocating for this, right? When it comes to border policy, what I want in a conceptual level is for a lot of the bureaucracy and red tape to go away. So one of the things that happened fairly recently was we had a very hard time getting interpreters who worked with us in Afghanistan. When we pulled out of Afghanistan, right? We had a real big problem getting the people who put their necks on the line for the servicemen and women in that country and acted as interpreters to be refugees and gain citizenship and be moved to America. There was a lot of issues with that, and I think that was a stain on our national honor. We should have moved heaven and earth to get these people out and get them and help them become citizens in a real way, because they put their, like, I'm not joking, they put their lives on the line to help out the American servicemen and women who served in that country. Yeah, if that doesn't get you citizenship, I don't know what should. Absolutely, if you're going to be doing that and putting you and your family at risk, it definitely is something that you should come with a streamlined process, right? So again, things like that, we need to fix it. There are problems with the immigration system as we have today. I like immigrants for the most part, right? However, I do have concerns when it comes to security, right? I think there is a real concern with bad actors coming into the country and causing problems, not just terrorism, but, for example, China buying up all sorts of land in all sorts of different countries, not just America, is a problem. Is a problem. How do we fix that? I'm not sure. but it's something that we can't just hand wave away or act like doesn't exist. $5 from Testicle Johnson. Wick, this is clearly a complicated issue, and we need creative and new solutions. Is maybe one way to address the border issues to build larger cages? Maybe. Maybe. Let's see. Liberal Cuck, welcome. Cluck. Liberal Cluck, sorry. Just got here. What are the positions going to be in this immigration debate? It's not really a debate. We're more having a conversation. I just want to kind of pick his brain a little bit on open borders, what he means by that, why he advocates for it, what the benefits are, how the process going from where we are now in America to where that is would work. All these things. I'm going to push back where I feel it's appropriate. I don't know what his stances are, so I don't know if I am going to push back at all. It could be a love fest. We could just be agreeing across the board and just talking about ways to implement it. It might not be spicy at all. I don't know. This is my first time having this gentleman on to my show, and so I'm not sure exactly his style. I have seen a little bit of his content. He went on a debate a few years ago about this topic. I watched it in part, but I want to see if... I'm not going to assume those are still his positions. I'd like to just, again, have a conversation with him about it. Right? Yeah, the liberal cluck. We're not just talking about people south of the border. We're talking about immigration in general. We're talking about border control, right? How much, if any, is appropriate, and in what methods and manners. So a line I hear a lot is that a freedom of movement is a human right. So what that means is that, as I understand it, and please correct me if I'm wrong, but as I understand it, what they mean by that is that anyone, anywhere, should be able to move anywhere they like and live there. And as long as they obey the laws of the land, and they're not a terrorist or something, they should be able to live wherever they want. So if you want to live in Canada, you should just be able to move there and go there. There shouldn't be any restrictions on that. You shouldn't be able to, a country or a nation shouldn't be able to keep you out for that. Just for no reason at all. I don't buy that as a human right. I don't think that's true, but I'm curious what they have to say. Shaved Dog's Arse SDA says you might want to consider using the words free immigration rather than open borders. Look, I had this argument on Twitter already, right? When they say open borders, they think everyone knows what they mean. No one knows what they mean. And you have to really interrogate it. But yeah, we'll see. We will see. We're getting into some sovereign citizen stuff now, eh? What do you mean sovereign citizen? Oh, the freedom of movement? Is that a sovereign citizen thing? Portland is Burning says, even if we knew what they meant, 99% of them are using the term wrong. Look, I didn't know what they mean. I'm going to be real with you. When they said open borders, I thought they meant in the way most people do. But apparently, within certain circles, there's a very academic definition of open borders. It doesn't mean what most people in America, at least, say that it means. But yeah, I guess we'll find out. Again, that's why I wanted to have this guy on, because I want to. Twitter is a terrible place for conversations, and I wanted to actually have a conversation because he was actually willing to engage with me and my questions on it in a way that the other people involved were not, and the other people were involved were basically just like, go read theory, and here's a link. And I don't give a shit what theory says. Okay, I do not care. What I care about is what the electorate thinks, what my interlocutor thinks, and what I think. That's what I care about. Theory, fuck theory. Okay, anyone who tells you to read theory is retarded, to be clear. Okay, read theory. What does that mean? Theory on what? A lot of theories are out there, right? There's a lot of arguments for a lot of things. Doesn't mean those things are right, or there's things that are something we should be advocating for. If someone cannot explain to you in a short and concise manner what they are trying to advocate for, then they're bad advocates, to be clear. You need to be, and look, brevity is the soul of wit. I need to be more concise when I advocate. But much like when I had Old Man Laundry ad on and he couldn't tell me a coherent reason why he votes Democrat, that's a problem. Okay? That's a problem. If you want to advocate for free immigration, unlimited immigration, open borders, whatever you want to call it, you need to be able to be short, concise, and on message. It cannot be confusing. If you confuse, you lose, as the YouTube algorithm says. If someone is having to guess what you mean or trying to make we're not talking bad actors here, right? Bad actors are a separate topic. But if the person you're talking to does not grok what you are saying, that is in part your fault. In most cases. That is in part your fault. Our opinions are better than yours by default, Mr. Geek? Maybe. Dario! Yeah, jump in the Discord. Here, exclamation point Discord. Is my Discord link down? Oh, there it is. Nightbot just took a minute. Click that link, jump backstage, I'll pull you on and we'll talk. Awesome. I see you. Give me 1 second. Let me make sure I have my ducks in a row. And then we'll talk because I'm very curious what you have to say. A little early, but that's fine. Hello?
Just a moment.
Sure, take your time.
Can you see me?
I can. Hi.
Hey.
What's up, brother?
Not so much. It's almost, well, it's half midnight here. Well, how do you say? 30 minutes midnight?
Half past midnight. Yeah. Well,
half past midnight?
Half past midnight. That's what I say. I don't know if it's the correct term, but
if it's 30 minutes until midnight.
Oh, 30 minutes until midnight? Then
Does that have
we got 30 minutes till midnight. That's about how it is. Anyway, man, so the reason I invited you on is because I was having a Twitter argument, as I often do, and you were the only one in that argument who was actually able and willing to engage with some of my questions. And I wanted to have you on to talk about it because in the course of the conversation that I was having, it became clear to me that what I thought people meant by open borders is probably not what these specific people meant. And you seem to be kind of in line with their way of thinking. So I wanted to have you on, to invite you on, to have like a chat about it and to kind of discuss with you what you mean when you say open borders, what that entails, how you would like to see it implemented, whether that be in America or other countries, and just kind of why you advocate for it. So,
sure.
I guess first things first, though, can you tell people who you are?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, it's been a while since I've done this, but yeah, my name is Dario. I used to be a streamer a very long time ago. I don't believe you streamed back when I did. Did you, Wick? Do you remember?
I don't remember.
So it was before your
probably,
time.
Yeah.
Yeah. But I actually used to have a decent audience. I think I had like 80, 90 concurrent viewers or so for like 6 months or so.
Okay.
But basically what killed me was just I live in Denmark and I streamed at US times. So that means that I would start my stream at midnight and my life would be destroyed.
Many such cases with scheduling and things, yeah.
Yes, yeah. Especially because I wanted to do politics, right? So I was doing the panels, and the panels start at like 6 p.m. or whatever, and that is like, well, fuck me.
6 p.m. if you're lucky, right?
If I'm lucky,
a lot of the panels that I've been invited on are like 10 p.m. Eastern. I'm like, look, I'm old. I can't stay up that late, right? Yeah. So, well, welcome back, and thank you for agreeing to come on.
Sure.
I guess let's just start with this. Open borders. What do you mean?
Sure. So I mean, there's and as I told you, like I didn't prepare anything here, so I'm just going quite off the cuff. I do make a lot of assumptions, and if you disagree with those assumptions, I can send you some studies and some links and stuff, and we can sort of hash that out. But I didn't come prepared with like numbers and stuff like that. But yeah, it's just in general, right? There's sort of three different angles to this triangle, right? So there's the moral argument, which I think is important, and then there's the economic argument, which I think is equally important and sort of ties into the moral. And then there's like the pragmatic argument in terms of like, well, what can we actually achieve, right? I think sort of the discussion with like open borders, oftentimes it sort of clashes between those angles, right? So like when somebody says, well, what's an open border, right? Does that mean no border? Does that mean no checks at all? Or like does that mean all criminals, terrorists go in free, right? I mean, then we sort of get into like the pragmatic angle in terms of like, well, what is important, right? What do we actually want when we say an open border, right? And like I'm not a libertarian, like anarcho-capitalist type of person, right? I'm a progressive, um, socialist leaning, I guess you could say. So like I don't subscribe to like the ultimate no border anarchist society freedom kind of thing. What I really care about is just like getting progressive policies implemented and getting basic human rights to people. But I also extend those things to people outside of like my country, I guess, as well, right? So I'm an internationalist. So I think the biggest argument, at least that sways me, is the economic argument, and the economic argument is basically that there's a super good paper called just look it up. It's called $1 trillion Bills on the Sidewalk. You know about that one?
I've never read this paper. No,
No,
elaborate.
but it's sure. But basically, it talks about sort of the deadweight loss that comes from restricting immigration worldwide. And the deadweight loss is basically like how much like GDP product could the world be making, like how much economical prosperity could there be for like individuals, but also like the state and stuff. And it talks about basically like on even like conservative estimates, just immigration policies in general, just like restricting immigration, accounts for a loss of like half of the world's GDP, basically. So the GDP of the world, if there was no, like, if everybody could move wherever they thought or had the most value for their labor, right? In the entire world, there was no restrictions. The GDP of the world would basically double, like just from their like workforce, like being
Interesting.
in the optimal place, right? So that's sort of the lens that I view all of this from, right? And just like anecdotally, right? I'm
Sure.
I'm a refugee, right, living in Denmark, right, and if I was living back in war-torn Bosnia, right, my labor probably wouldn't be worth as much as it is here, right? I'm a software engineer, not that many jobs like that down there. So just like that, right? Like imagine all the people of the world who are super talented, but just happen to be born in like bad places, like in like comparatively, right? How
Sure.
much more they could do with their life if they were living in the U.S., right? So
So, can I ask a couple questions on that, just that come to mind? Like, and again, I haven't read the paper, so keep that in mind.
sure.
Maybe the paper answers this, and these are silly questions, but I haven't read the paper, so I'm gonna have to ask you as
I
the
just preface. It's been like 3 or 4
sure.
years since I've read it, but I'll do my best.
Okay. So the main kind of thing that kind of sticks in my mind when you're explaining this paper is the global GDP. If everyone is allowed to just move wherever they want without restrictions, um, it seems to me that calling it the global GDP, while true, might kind of undersell the brain drain effect that will happen. So I can absolutely see the immigration pooling in maybe a few countries, right? America,
Sure.
Canada, some European nations, and things like that. Whereas other countries, less developed countries, less economically viable countries, for whatever reason, will simply have all their talent, all their the smart people, the the successful people will just not be there anymore. And I
Sure,
think
and like
that I don't know. That just seems like a way to make sure that the rich get richer and the poor get poorer, but on a country scale. Does that make sense?
Sure, sure. I think I get what you're saying, and I think I understand. Um, I guess there's just multiple different ways, right? There's I remember a long time ago. I think that's got to be when I was studying at university. I read something about like how brain drain isn't actually a thing that generally happens, at least to the degree that people talk about it, right? So first there we can talk about that, but in general, if you just think about it, right, like unless you think that there's only a set amount of people who have the option to qualify up to be like smart, be the brain that's getting drained, right? And I think, and I don't believe that. So I believe that there's way more people who have the potential to be the brain, right? And like there's like orders of magnitudes more than the people who would be drained, right? So I think if you just view it from that angle, even if there would be some brain drain to some degree, right? But just the ability for people to build up the skill sets that they inherently have, given the education and the opportunities of different places, they could potentially bring it back. Or even if everybody comes in and lives in the United States, right? I mean, overall, that's a win for the world, right? If everybody is doing better off in a country like the United States compared to like living in extreme poverty somewhere else when they could have the opportunity to, right? So, I guess sort of a humanitarian kind of response there. But yeah, like personally, I'm not very big in general on like nationality and borders. Like I see myself more as like a nomadic kind of guy.
A wanderer, a rolling
I
stone, if
wonder.
you will, right? Just
Yes,
going from
and
place to place.
I actually did live in the U.S. for a year as
What
well.
part, if I may ask?
New York.
New York. Oh, the city or the
Yes,
state, or both? I guess both. But
the city. Yeah,
the
I actually lived
city.
on Manhattan.
Did you like it? I've been to New York City, but I've obviously never lived there. Did what was your impression out of curiosity? I know this is kind of an aside, but I'm just
Actually, so I think I'd give you my impression of the U.S. in general. So coming from Denmark,
mm,
like a socially democratic Nordic nation, I would say the average quality of life, I feel like, or at least there's some weird quality of life stuff missing in the United States. Like just stuff like suddenly going from having completely free healthcare in Denmark, right? I can just go to the doctor, just having a label like a cost sign attached to going to the doctor, that made me want to go to the doctor less. Like
yeah.
even if the cost wasn't immense, right? Even if I could afford it, just knowing that it would cost me money just made me do it less, and that just feels wrong.
I understand. Well, that's a another potential problem I have with like completely open borders, but we'll get into that. $5 from Jenny Burns to ask this question. This sounds interesting, but only indicates a prescription for immigration for labor. What about disabled immigrants or children?
So we can go down. So it just depends on who I'm talking to when we talk about those things, right? So oftentimes, and I think you're gonna reach a little bit of the same argument in terms of like healthcare and stuff like that, like being a drain on the system, right, with immigrants and stuff like that. And the answer to that is simply the money overall that you would make from having immigrants is going to outweigh the costs of paying for basic services for immigrants by so many times more, right? Like the economic growth is an essential part of that argument. Right? Without the economic growth, I think um, it would be way easier to argue against immigration, because then it would just be like, well, we don't want the people that are living in our country to be worse off, right? So then you become protectionist, right? But generally in economics, right? I mean, most economists agree that immigration is a boon for the economy, right? We can look at all the data there, and more immigration is usually better. I mean, there's some edge cases we
Is
can
there an
talk
upper
about,
limit
right?
on that out of curiosity? So like
I
I
mean,
understand like the more is better, but it's like
yeah,
water. If you drink more water, you'll get
yeah.
healthier, but there's a point where
Yeah.
if you're drowning,
So you would need to. So obviously you would need
hmm,
to. Right. There's some future stuff there
sure.
as well. Right. In terms of like automation and stuff, and like, I mean, I don't have all the answers in terms of like how an AI future is gonna look like, right, with mass automation.
Wait, you don't have all the answers? What are you doing? No, go ahead.
But like disregarding that, right? So assuming that the immigration comes and is at a reasonable pace where people can go into like like a country or like a state or like a city, whatever, do work, right, and stuff like that, and implement into that local economy or like the global state economy, then there is basically no upper limit. Right? The only issue is if there's like, let's say tomorrow 500 million immigrants try and come in at the same time, right? Obviously, there would be some logistical issues, but I think those can even be solved by just like we could put a cap of like 100 million immigrants per year or something like absurdly high, right? So maybe you'd have to wait like a little bit just for like logistical purposes, but like, yeah, I
100
mean,
million seems like a lot, man. Um,
yeah, I
I
mean,
don't I don't
I
have the numbers in front of me, but just again, we're just talking
yeah, yeah,
intuition here. 100 million in a year would be not, I don't want to use the word devastating because it might be very good. It would be um a major change in every aspect of American life, I think, if we had 100 million more people just appear, right?
sure.
There would be,
Or you would feel nothing because they would move into the Midwest and work there.
man, Americans don't even want to move into the Midwest though, right? Like no one's
Sure.
moving there.
Sure, but it's all about like incentives, right? So I mean, if the incentives are there, right? If there was like a new New York City in the Midwest, right? I mean, there's no reason why there couldn't be, right? With the new tech age and stuff like that, and the new Silicon Valley. Um, I mean,
Maybe
the reason why California and New York exist on the coast, right, is because in the past it was a big boon to have
transportation,
like
shipping.
transportation
Yeah, it's
stuff.
all
Yeah,
that,
yeah.
right?
But like with the tech future, right? I mean, they could all work in tech, software, whatever, right? And like supporting roles for that. I mean, there's no issues there, I think.
Maybe. So you mentioned there were other like arguments on this. I'm going to talk about the right. I don't even know how to say this or what you would call it. So if I'm using the wrong term, please correct me. Um, the human right of freedom of movement. So I've heard you make this argument before. I've heard other people make this arguments. Um, but tell me about it, just in your own words. Because you mentioned this earlier, right? For people to just move wherever they want. Is that a human right, in your opinion?
Yes, I think so. I think each person should have the uh like the full I guess freedom to pursue their um like their life, I guess their life goals and like what they want in life and like go to where they best think that their lives could unfold, right? And take their family and stuff like that. I think that is like a fundamental part of being a human, right? And I think as like somebody with a more international leaning kind of thing, right? As I said before, like I extend that right to everybody on the globe, right? I don't feel closer to somebody who lives in my country, but like at the other part of the country than I do to somebody who lives in Germany or Sweden or whatever. Like I feel equally as close to those people.
Interesting.
Um,
Okay.
I mean, I would draw obviously a distinction between like my family and friends, right? Obviously, I care
Obviously,
more
yeah, yeah.
about those, like in my near, but like somebody who I don't even know all the people who live in my city, right? There's just random people that I'll never meet. So, I mean, I don't see any distinction there.
Yeah, I guess the difference here would be like I don't know if we need to bring them to where we are to help them because I agree with you. I think that I we should be caring about people who don't live near us because they're people too, right? They have the same wants, needs, and desires, right? And for the most part, there's cultural differences here and there, but for the most part, like everyone wants to succeed. Everyone wants to be happy, healthy, and wealthy, and I think that the question is, will open immigration aid in that, or will it be more of a detriment? And that's something we can discuss. 100 bits from Portland is burning to ask this question. How did our hospitals and ICU capacity fare during COVID? Now imagine we dumped 5 million new immigrants into the country in 2019. Widespread chaos guaranteed. This is a joke. We have infrastructure that is, well, this isn't a question, dude.
Well,
We have infrastructure that is in no way capable of taking on a rapid,
sure,
massive influx of new citizens.
sure,
But
and
to that question, right? Like we do
sure,
have a struggling infrastructure, medical infrastructure in America. If we allowed free immigration just without restriction, other than the terrorists, criminals, etc. Um, that would be a massive, at least initial, impact on the infrastructure of our country. Not just for medical issues, but think about all the think about all the things that we do day to day, right? All the logistic trains and supplies. Because we had such a issue with COVID, it impacted almost everything. I don't know what's the answer to that. How
yeah,
does
sure,
open borders address
yeah,
that? I guess.
sure. So, and this is, I'm just gonna go back to this argument every single time, right? And if I guess if we don't agree on the empirics, obviously it's gonna be hard, right? But the answer is just economics, right? So given that you believe me when I tell you the immense economical boon that this would bring, right? So like there might be like an initial shock to the system, right? And we might say, okay, this is not something that we tomorrow Biden stamps something that says now there is no restrictions, right? This might be like a phasing in, right, over like a couple of years. Like I don't mind that, right? I think infrastructure should hold, but like given that we believe the economic argument, right, that the economists are proposing, the answer is just what's gonna stop us from building 500 million new hospitals, right? Like having 500 million new nurses, right? Like all of these people would grow in the same way that we do now, but the only difference is that we would have more money to go around, right? So if we do believe the argument and the labor has been effectivized, it grows the economy for everybody, right? Suddenly we have enough money to do universal health care, to do like uh, a UBI, like whatever progressive uh, leftist policy you want to do. Suddenly we have the money in the state to do that.
Hmm.
Right? And that's why, like, that's also a big reason why I support it. I think it's the easiest and best way to just grow the budget overall.
There is a like people call this a progressive policy. I don't know if it is because there's a lot of progressive candidates. Bernie Sanders, for example, is pretty
Oh.
anti-open border. His argument is that it impacts the workers in the country negatively, right? They again standard they lose their jobs.
And
They
he's
don't have enough.
unfortunately he's wrong about that. I
Oh,
mean,
you think he's
I,
wrong? Okay,
I mean,
fine.
I mean, it's just empirically wrong. I mean, I can link you some stuff. I mean, we can talk a little bit about it, but basically, if you look into the economics and the studies, the only workers who are negatively impacted are high school dropouts, and they generally see a net loss of I think it's so they are about, I think it was something like 8%, 8 to 10% of the population, and they see a decrease in wages of about 1 to 5%, something like that. But everybody else sees like a massive growth, right? And like supplementary positions open up,
Sure.
right? So like up qualifying, so like somebody who used to be like a worker can then become a manager or something like that, right? Like just yeah, it's been debunked.
Yeah, but that's the thing. Like we already, at least in America, we have what's called like deaths of despair. Have you heard that term? Are you
Sure.
familiar? So
Do you mind if I
especially
respond to the the guy in chat?
look, don't look at chat. Look at
Or-
me. Don't look at chat. Look
okay,
at me. Okay, look at me. The chat will one guy you. Chat will one guy you. I promise.
I am
Okay.
doing one guide currently.
You are getting one guide. I promise you. But look at me. Look at me. Okay. If you want, we could bring Portland is burning on later. But for now, I want to talk to you before Portland
Sure.
gets to you. Um, sorry, you distracted me. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. So deaths of despair, right? So in Appalachia and in the Midwest specifically, um, but this is true from sea to shining sea, like across the nation to various extents. Um, in poor communities that are undereducated, so not it's not just high school dropouts, but people without college degrees, are being devastated, not just economically, but in all sorts of ways, right? So culturally, they're being impacted, they're being pushed to the side, and at least they feel they're being pushed to the side. Let's say that, and it's a real big issue. So when they come to me, or someone who lives in West Virginia, right, never graduated from college, uh, he can't he can't afford to live on the wages, right, that someone from Mexico or an immigrant from India or one of these other economically depressed countries can. Um, how do we sell them on open borders? What would you tell
Sure.
them?
I'll tell you, listen, I am fucking as socialist and progressive as it gets, right? And what I want for you, what I think you need, is I think you need universal healthcare, full stop. I think you need free housing. I think you need free access to internet. I think you need like free access to basic food, water, supply, right? And then everything else is optional. I think then working like a super shitty like minimum wage job or whatever, that becomes an optional thing you can do, right? And I think the only way that we can get to that kind of society that I'm proposing is to give a huge shock to the economy, right? Like right now there could be enough money to do all those things that I'm proposing, but there's no way it's going to pass because it's going to raise taxes too much on the wrong people that obviously like are going to vote against it, right? So the only way that we're going to achieve a better future is to unite with the workers of the world, right? All of the workers of the world need to come together, need to pool their labor, need to the best way to upgrade and like make sure your labor is better appreciated is to make sure that there's enough opportunities and enough competition in your area so that people need you, right? People need you, they need to pay you more. And that's what a new immigration population does, right? And you have an advantage, right? Because you've already living there, you're already know the language, right? You already have a
Sure.
community, so you're gonna be first in line to get a better job, right? And then they'll be your co-workers, right? And then everybody's gonna be better off. They're gonna be moving from a
So
way shittier.
all we need is for everyone to come together in peace and love and to solve all their issues and to make sure that they work together without conflict. That's all. That's it. How come we don't
Yeah,
have it already? Wow, that's such an easy thing to do,
because
Dario.
everybody is
What a weird,
nationalist.
like, why? Like, I don't understand. Like, I don't know how we haven't already done all
I
this.
mean,
What?
so the actual reason why is because I mean the U.S. And I'm not as up to date on the history, but the U.S. used to have way more lax immigration laws, right? Like back in the 20s or before the 20s. I mean, obviously there was like some
We
weird
had
weird shit.
there was a I forget the name of the policy, but it was like an emergency order, right? In the 1921, I
Yeah,
believe.
21. Yeah,
Um,
exactly.
man, I wish I. It's on the tip of my tongue, right? But that did change a lot of the policies that we
Yeah.
had. But
But
when it,
before that, it
mm,
was basically like people come, right, and they work and whatever. But
kinda. I mean, like if
there
you're
was
talking
some
about like the
racism.
Ellis Island immigrants and things like that, right?
There was some racism.
Some,
There
a
was
little
some bad
bit,
racism. There
just
was some
a
bad
smidge,
racism for sure.
right?
But basically, so since then, like immigration has just been more and more strict, basically, right? In terms of like quotas and stuff like that, and a lot of that has just been pushed by more racism, right? Like just more racism, more national, uh, right? And like it used to be that the Republicans liked immigration because it helps the economy, right? So the left used to be against immigration, and now it's kind of swapped. So now it's like the Republicans are against immigration because oh no, they're brown, and the left is like oh we're kind of pro-immigration, right? So I mean, I think if everybody looks at the actual like data, like just hard data, and just thinks about the actual things we could do, and just thinks about hey maybe the people across the border aren't actually so dangerous criminals, and maybe they just want a better life just like you want and you want for your family. I think it's an easy slam dunk.
Sure, but there are a lot of people who are criminals that are across the border, right? The cartels are a huge
Sure,
problem in Mexico, for
sure.
example. And I think that while we have a neighbor who has smuggled in, I think in 2018, I believe they border control caught like 4.5 million pounds or tons, or I forget I don't think it was tons. I think it was like pounds of illegal narcotics, right? And you can argue that, oh, some of them shouldn't have been illegal, some of them should be fine, but we are having, and I think it'd be, well, I guess I'll ask you this. I'll ask you this, Dario. Why do, if all the data, all the economic data points to what you're saying, we'll just cop it as true. Everything you said is correct. All the economic data points to this. Why haven't we done anything about this in America? Why do we still have stricter and stricter border policies,
Because
etc.?
because nobody actually cares about the economics. Why do both parties keep spending money when there's a deficit, right? Like, why does Trump talk about like, oh, we should care about the budget and stuff, and then just keep spending, right? Like, why does Trump do tariffs on China when literally everybody agrees that it's just going to be an economic like bad decision for everything, right? Like, it's not going to help your workers, not going to help anybody. It's just going to shooting yourself. Like, it's just because at the end of the day, people don't actually care that much about economics. They just care about selling like some vision to their base and getting reelected, right? I
I
mean,
don't know. I think the average citizen wants, like, when you talk about economics, what they absolutely care about, and we have data for this, is people vote on their pocketbooks. They vote on kitchen table issues such as the price of gas. The price of gas has a huge correlation to how people vote,
sure.
right? If the price of gas goes up, the people, whoever is in power at the time, tends to take a little bit of a shellacking. It's not a one-to-one. It's not a perfect canary, and you can argue it's not causal, and that's fair. But I don't know if I
Yeah, but can
agree.
you? So okay. So you tell me, because I haven't.
Sure,
I'm not as in tune with current politics as I used to be, right?
sure.
But just from the snippets I read on Twitter, right? So the
It's
economy is doing way better under Biden right now, right? It's like super good. Unemployment is at
yes,
an
but
all
no one believes it.
exactly. So that's what I'm telling you. Right? Like
Mm.
people don't actually care about
No,
how
they
well
care. The
well,
problem here, let me explain the problem with this. Is not that they don't care. The reason that they don't believe that the economy is better is because their messaging by Biden has been dog shit on this, right? He
sure.
hasn't he hasn't pushed this at all because they're so afraid of telling people something and then um, others getting offended, like, well, I'm not richer, and things like that. So there's that. There's a lot of oppositional, like, for whatever reason, there's a segment of the left that thinks like nothing good can happen in America. They have to, and this is the right too. When it comes to Biden, Biden can do no right at all. And so everything that he does that might be by correct or might have improved things has to either A, have been actually what Trump did, or B, um, hasn't actually happened. And that's a huge problem.
Yeah.
But it's not that they don't care. They care very deeply.
Well,
It's that
yeah.
they
I
are
mean,
they are
yeah, yeah,
unable to,
yeah.
the
Yeah.
messaging sucks,
That's
right?
yeah. That. I guess that's what I meant. I mean, obviously they care, right? Because they feel if they are economically impacted, then they can't buy as much stuff, right? They can't afford to live. Obviously, they care about that. That's not what I meant. But what I was trying to communicate was, I guess, what you said, right? That um, they even if the economy is doing good, right, objectively based on the markers we have for the economy, right, it doesn't matter. What matters is what they hear and like what they are being told and sold by like the politicians and
And
stuff,
there's
right?
there's
So
also, right, like, we talk about the economy as a monolith. It's not, right?
no, sure,
There's
yeah, it's
wages, wage
localized.
growth, inflation, housing prices, all these factors. And so a lot of times when we have good economic indicators, right, uh, they can be seen as just corporate bottom line, right? Like, so a lot of people lost money in COVID, but there's a lot of people who got very, very rich during COVID as
Yeah,
well,
for
right?
sure.
Who increased their wealth astronomically. And so that's, to tie it
Yeah,
back
but
into
that's just
immigration.
to me that's just a redistribution problem.
Sure. Uh, but that is a problem. And when we tie
Yeah,
this back
for
into
sure.
immigration, right, there is a very real fear among people that when we have this economic boon that immigration will bring, it won't actually go to them. And they will take all the hits from it, right? All the cons, and they will get none of the pros. And I think that is a very real concern because all these things that you've talked about when it comes to opening immigration, open borders, whatever we want to call it, um, very real benefits, but they require, at least is my understanding, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, the infrastructure to be in place before we do this. Otherwise, it's going to be, at least for the short term,
Uh,
at least
Sure.
for the short term, there's going to be a lot of pain. And
Sure. I mean, it just it. So I don't want to leave you with the wrong impression, right?
oh,
So
sure.
when I talk about this, right, I'm not coming at it from like an ideological sense, right? I'm not like I don't ultimately. I mean, it's just this is what I believe in, right? And I think it's the correct thing based on the information I have, right? If the information that I have isn't correct, then I'll change my mind, right? So based on what I know on this topic, right? So we can talk about edge cases with like if there's too much immigration overnight, right? And I think we can solve all of those things, right? Equally so, I think we can also solve the workers in the country feeling left out of the economy issue. I think we can do that in a multiple of different ways, right? Either through redistribution, either through new services, so that make sure that everybody benefits from a growing economy. I support those regardless if there is more immigration or not, right? I think that's just a flat out good thing, right? Um, but equally so, I think just increasing immigration. Obviously, I mean, we can talk about some common sense like phasing in or whatever, but like just increasing it full stop is gonna be a boon to like 95% of people living in the country, right? And obviously, the last 5%, they're gonna see like a small, I guess, downturn. And is it gonna suck for them if nothing else happens? For sure, right? And I think we should fight to make sure that that is not the only policy, right? And make sure we help the people who are worse off in
Of
society,
course.
right? But like I wouldn't say that's like a reason to not do
Sure.
open
Let's
immigration.
yeah, no, I'm with you, right? Like if anyone, like I'm never a one issue person, right?
Yeah,
There are too many things that are very, what's it called? Interconnected that again we can't just focus on any one thing. But I wanted to talk about immigration from a moral lens for a moment. If
sure.
and I wanted to maybe de-Americify, just for a brief moment at least. Um, do we think that there? I guess I'll ask you this: under what circumstances do you think a country would be morally not obligated, but morally okay to restrict or close their borders towards immigrants? Or do you not think there's any situation?
Wait, can you repeat that?
Sure. Under what
Was that a
circumstances?
double negative?
It might have been. I'm poor at phrasing things. Please forgive me and try to
All
try
good.
to work with me here a little bit.
All good.
Under what circumstances would a country be morally okay to close or restrict their borders from immigrants coming in? So, in other words, to say, okay, actually, this issue is we have this
Morally?
circumstance. We can't accept anyone else. Sorry.
So I guess it depends on what you mean when you say morally, right? So morally, I would say no. I would say there is no, but I would say I guess it sort of built into the pragmatics, right? Like pragmatically in terms of like the hospitals, COVID example, stuff like that. If there's a pandemic going on and you fear that like it's gonna cause millions of people dying like from day over because there's like now immigration, right? I mean, there's cases like that where I would agree, right? But it's mostly it's not as much moral as just like a pragmatic like what happens if there's like 100 million people at the border just knocking and being like, hey, we're here, right?
Well,
And then there's like, okay, we need to slow down a little bit, right? And like but definitely way less than people think, I think.
one of the reasons I ask is because of the Israel Palestine situation going on right
Yeah.
now, and we can take this from either direction. Palestinians are very angry and upset, and rightfully so, that they have settlers coming into their lands, West Bank, etc., and setting up shop. What is the difference between that and an immigrant coming into another country?
Well, I mean, so I'm not an expert on the Israel-Palestine
Yeah.
situation, but to my knowledge, the issue with the settlements is that they are illegally occupying territory, right?
We say it's illegal, right? And that's fair, but I want to talk about it from a moral lens, like I said. Like, if we believe that everyone has a right to move wherever they want,
Sure.
why is it illegal, or should it even be illegal for people from Jerusalem to be able to move into the West Bank and just say, hey, I'm going to live here now?
Well, I mean, in terms of like, so are you so from a are you, so if, are you asking from a moral perspective?
Yeah,
Like,
sure. If we as
sure,
humans have the right to move wherever we like,
yeah. I
why
mean, from a
cannot
moral,
a
sure, from a
Jewish
moral perspective,
family?
I think it should be okay for people to move and live wherever they want, even in Israel, Palestine, whatever. That's what I think, right? And obviously, other people think differently, right? But yeah,
Should it be illegal to have, or
I mean, it should be illegal to go in and like evict people and steal
sure,
their shit and stuff. I mean,
absolutely, I agree. But one of the issues we have in America, to bring it back to America, is we have Chinese nationals coming in, buying land, setting up shop, and engaging in espionage in on this country, right? They
well,
do it
the
in Canada
espionage
too.
thing would be the bad thing, right?
Yes, but it's enabled and abetted by their being able to. I just I have concerns with a foreign country being able to buy and settle in another country. We know Russia, for example, meddles with our elections. They added it in 2016. They tried to do it in 2020, and it's likely they'll
Sure.
try to do it in 2024. If we have free and open immigration, what is to keep a country like China from sending in so many people and influencing the vote that way? Like sending
Well,
50
I
million
mean,
in to go and vote, or do you
sure.
not think that immigration is tied should be tied to voting, right? So if you think like,
Yeah,
oh, they can
we,
live here but they maybe not able to vote,
yeah,
that's
we
one
can,
thing, right?
we can set restrictions up there. Like, I don't mind. Like, there's a bunch of people have talked about this. Like, it's kind of like the same. It goes down the same angle as the using social services angle. Right? It's kind of the same answer. Is if we can look at the empirics, right, and we can say, okay, well, if there's 100 million people that comes in and they start using the social services on day one, right, and like and they can use everything, and the system isn't ready for that kind of shock, right, we can just put restrictions on there and it's still going to be a better outcome for everybody, right? Like, the 100 million people wouldn't come in with the restrictions if they didn't believe it was better than where they were coming from, right? And the people who are living there can live without the burden to the social system, right? That they would provide in like the, I guess, in the short term shock, right? So in the same way we can do with voting, right? I mean, I believe we do something similar in Denmark. We have to live and work in Denmark for 5 years before you get access to like voting and stuff like that, right? Something similar, right? I mean,
No, interesting. I did not know that about Denmark. So you can't. So even within the EU, right? Well, first of all, I don't. I forget. Is Denmark part of the EU? I forget.
yes,
Yes. Okay. So are they
I'm
a
part of the
signatory
Schengen as
of
well.
the open treaty that they had, the
Yeah,
Zur
Schengen. It's in Schengen zone.
Schengen zone? Okay. Thank you. Um, so if you were from France, you could move and live in Denmark, but you wouldn't be able to vote in Denmark for 5 years. Is that how that
Yeah,
works?
I think there's like some. I think it's five. I don't remember. But yeah, there's like some amount of years. I mean, similar restrictions like that. I think it's fine, right? I think
Okay.
I don't mind like putting like saying, okay, you need to come like live and commit to like a place before you can, like, same way in like state elections, right, or
So they
like
have a
city,
different
right?
set of rights, basically. An immigrant has a
Yeah,
different set
like
of rights than a citizen,
temporarily.
like apartheid. Yeah, I got you. Okay, got you. I'm memeing a little bit, but no, it's No, that's reasonable, I think. And
So
this
so
is why this
what you
hard.
have to what you have to think about is right. So imagine you open the borders, right, and you say once you come to the U.S. You have to work, right? You have to come to the U.S. and you have to work. You have to provide for yourself for like some amount of time, right, at the minimum. And then after 5 years, you become naturalized, right? And then you are able to vote. You're able to use the social systems in the same way as everybody else, right? And then people would still come. People would still come in droves because people are living in immensely worse conditions, right? Just the opportunity to come and work and live in the United States, even if they have to pay for everything, is far better than what they currently have, right? So people would still come. The the national population wouldn't be feeling the negative effects, right? They would be feeling the positive effects, and then gradually people would be naturalized in, and they would just become part of the population, right?
Yeah, it sounds. I mean, like, look, if we are talking about phasing in, because I, I guess my stance on this is I am pro-immigration to a large extent. I think that the system we have, at least in America, needs to be streamlined. It needs to be opened up. More access needs to be given. But I do have concerns with a total opening. Let me read a couple super chats so I can make a little money, and then
Sure.
I'll continue down this line. $2 from
Like,
Tescal Johnson. Immigrants are taking our jobs and our women. Thank you for the $2. I'll take your $2.
immigrants will take your jobs and you'll like it.
$5 from 𝕻𝖎. How will you track who is in the country for how long? Sounds to me that you're okay with current immigration except the cap of immigrants per year. And
Sure.
that
You'll
is what it
track
sounds
in.
like. In talking to you
I
online,
mean,
it
yeah,
sounds
I
like
mean,
you just want to, you're cool with the immigration as is. You just want to take the cap off.
well, I mean, we can talk about the semantics, right? I'm not married to the name open borders, right? You can
Okay,
call it whatever you want, right? I'm just
sure.
advocating for an idea, right? Like I have, like, and many people talk about this idea, right? And the basis of that idea is just there can't really be too much immigration, right? There can be in the very short term, right? In terms of like phasing, but like in the long term, like over 20, 30, whatever years, right? There's pretty much no cap, right? So as much as we can get, I'm down for that, right? If that means
Okay.
like doubling the current, let's go for it, tripling, whatever, right? And then in terms of like sorry, what was the question again? Yeah, the
How will you
current
track
laws,
who's in the
right?
country for how long? So, for example, in
Sure.
Denmark, the example you used in
Yeah,
Denmark, they have to
digitally.
work for 5 years. What about the
Yeah, you
people
just
who can't end up finding the job for whatever reason, right? We have unemployment. Unemployment is just a thing. Um,
sure. I mean, if they can't find any job, I mean, they have to leave. I mean, that's
okay, sure.
kind of
If
what
you
it's
can't
like, right?
find a
Yeah.
job, gang, go deport your ass. Hell
I
yeah.
mean, there's like some rules, right? I mean, there's like I think it's like you have to once you have to have a job or like I mean there and it's pretty lax in terms of like what counts as a job, right? I mean it like it's not like a competitive full-time employment stuff like that, but like the native what counts as a job is pretty low, right? And then you can't be without any kind of job at all for I think it's a year. And then you'll have start having issues, right? And then there's like a process of like stuff like that, right? But yeah, I mean, but obviously, I mean, if you can't support yourself, you don't have a job, right? I mean, obviously, oh, you can also, I think you can also stay if somebody's supporting you, right? So if you're married or something like that. I mean,
Sure. I mean,
there's a bunch
yeah.
of criteria, but yeah,
Interesting. No, I'm not. Look, I'm not against it at all. My issue is with, like, again, as I was telling my chat before you came in, I don't know what people mean when they say open borders because everyone I talk to, every single person I talk to has substantively different ideas of
sure,
what it is, how to get there, and what to, like, what, because look, the devil's in the details for me in this, right? Like, what are the specific policies that we want to have happen, right? What
sure,
specific ways are we going to get from where we are now to where we have to, or where we want to be? And I think that there should be mechanisms in place in case you're wrong. So the
sure,
economists all predict that It's going to be a huge economic boon. We let people in, we loosen the cap, we have a soft border where we have more and more immigrants coming in, but then we notice that it's negatively impacting the economy. How do we step in? In what ways do we limit this? What do we do now? Right?
I mean, there's ways to test, right? And it's already been tested. I like it's not just like something people pull out of their ass, right? So there's been a bunch of like tests in terms of like what happens when a population, like a shock to a small population comes in. I think there's like something with in California. There was like a study in like I want to say it's like a small town where suddenly there's like a shock of like a 30%. I'm just pulling stuff out of my ass, but there's like a huge amount of people like coming in like out of nowhere. And there was a study about like what that did to the local economy and stuff. And like again, there is like some there can be some very short-term issues, right? But like when we talk about, there's like a difference between economic impact and fiscal impact, right? So like fiscally, there can be some issues short-term, right? But like overall, economically, right? That's gonna even out.
Yeah, I just and the other thing that like makes this hard to accept, and it's I'm trying to, but it makes it hard to accept, is I see the poor way that we handle our citizens now. Homelessness is a real issue in America,
Yeah, I mean,
especially
it's
in the
not
cities.
it's not a one-stop like solution to everything. Obviously,
Yeah.
it's just one policy, right? I mean,
No, I'm not saying that you're saying that it'll solve the issue. I'm just saying that I don't know if we're going to be able to put the infrastructure in place because we're not doing it now with the people we have. Like the people that we are in charge of as a nation now, we are failing. And until we succeed for them, I don't know if we can be expected to accept even more. Does that make sense?
sure. And I mean, I don't even think any type of open borders policy is feasible like
Okay.
in the next like many years. In the same way that I am kind of black pilled in general on like big political change. I think my takeaway from US politics in the past few years is that it's more divided than it's pretty much ever been. Which means that the big changes that I want to see
Oh, I
is
don't
going to
know
be
about
harder and
that.
harder.
Like the '60s, we used to blow each other up, right? The leather
Sure,
bomb.
sure, sure,
Like I
but
don't know
like
about that, but yeah,
sure, but like in recent times, at least,
sure.
it seems
No,
to be
I'll agree
getting
with that.
worse. And in that way, like, is there things that I would say are more important than open borders for sure? Right. I think there's definitely progressive policies that I would
What's
rather
your number
see.
one policy out of curiosity?
Healthcare, I think, some sort of
Base.
universal healthcare. I
Hell
think that
yeah,
would
I'm for that.
be number one. I mean, and I do again, and I know that's a hard sell, but I do believe, right? If you look at the studies and the economists, right, I do believe that all of the things that I want to do become easier if the economy grows, right? It's
See,
easier
I
to
think
find money.
yeah, I think even if it's hard to do free healthcare, we should do like even if there, it
Yeah,
comes at
for
a
sure.
cost to other issues, right? Because healthcare is something that affects almost all of us. I think we have a huge problem with insurance companies. I think they're scams in a lot of cases, and I'm not using that word lightly. um, at least in America, from America's centrist lens. Um, but this is one of those things where like almost everyone wants to improve our healthcare. It's just how do we do that? And there are interests that are keeping us from doing that, right? The level of control and influence that big corporations, pharmaceuticals, as well as insurance companies have on our electorate, not our electorate, but our politicians, is astounding. And so there are big obstacles with that. And again,
Well,
for the
I can say
hmm,
a big part of that, because we do actually have issues with the healthcare in Denmark as well, in terms
hmm,
specifically about workers. But one thing, healthcare workers like nurses and stuff, right? Immigrants do that a lot, right? There's so many immigrant nurses in Denmark, like because there's just like I'm not gonna say it's an easy job, right? But it's a job that people want to do, right? Like people come and they want to be nurses, and it's a fulfilling job that people want to do, right? Sometimes there's just not enough people to do those kinds of jobs, and I think yeah, again, one thing that immigration can help with, right? Like more doctors, more nurses, like more of these people, right? Like I think in the U.S. there's also quite a lot of immigrant doctors, right? There's like a trope.
Oh, yes,
Um,
that is a stereotype.
yeah,
It has some truth to it, right?
yeah,
I
yeah.
think that I guess that's another concern when it comes from the morality of all this is the way that America treats its immigrants is sometimes pretty poor, especially for the less low-skilled labor immigrants.
Sure. But
Um,
isn't it also an immigrant nation?
it is. It's a we are a nation of dualities, right? So
Yeah,
again, you can be very, very successful here, or you cannot. And that gap is a problem, right? I think that the way we've treated and exploited companies specifically have exploited undocumented workers right here is a real big problem. I'm hoping
imagine
by
if they were all
streamlining, yeah,
documented.
yeah, that's I'm giving you a point here, right? Like I think imagine if we were able to kind of open that up, there would probably be less exploitation in that regard. But I am concerned about other types of exploitation coming to fill in those gaps. And I do, again, in the capitalist system that we live in, I do think that there will be a lot of exploitation of the lower classes, the working classes, that is going to be impacted the most by a softer border policy or an open border policy or a free immigration, whatever you want to call it, right?
Sure.
I guess
Do you want me to
I'll ask
respond?
this as kind of like a final question before, and maybe we'll take a caller or two. Because I know it's late for you. My question is, what country or set of countries do you think currently has immigration right or does immigration right?
Well, right in terms of like what I would want, I
Yeah,
don't know.
obviously, what you would
I
want
don't know.
is
I don't know if there's any. They do it well enough. I think the
really none.
the idea. I think the idea of the Schengen zone is pretty good. I will say that Denmark has its issues with immigration in terms of like, um, just like I guess, but it's more culturally, like with the racism and all of that. Like, it's not a. I think in many ways, the U.S. actually does better on immigration than many other places in the world.
Really?
So it's not all bad.
Okay. What do
It
we
just
do
needs to
right?
do more. Um, I I feel like there is just because there's so many different people at this point living in the US, like it's less homogenous, right? That there is less, like you can find places where you're not as stigmatized, right? Like being an immigrant in the United States, right? If you're brown, black, whatever. Um, where in many other countries where it's way more homogenous society, like very white in Denmark, I think it's like 92% white people. I mean, there's some issues with that, right? But yeah, I don't know. And in terms of like assimilation, I think it's kind of rough coming as an immigrant to Denmark and then having to learn Danish. It's way better to know English, just in general. And also, most people, like not most people, but many people know English like before they come to the country, right? So I mean, there's many advantages that the U.S. has over, um, yeah, smaller countries, I guess.
Okay. Is there anything else you wanted to talk about or say, or anything that we didn't get to that you would have liked to have us get to?
No, I mean, and if there's again, we can talk about the empirics. I think a lot of people in chat are raging about the empirics or whatever. I mean,
Can you
I can
drop
post.
the links that you've been referencing into either
Sure.
my Discord, where people could find it,
Yeah.
or if you want to do it in the chat, in the Twitch or the YouTube chat, or I
Sure.
guess a Kick if for all the like 10 people watching on Kick, but you know. I'm sorry.
Yeah, Denmark is really racist. Yes, I am not sugarcoating it at all. I am also an immigrant refugee living in Denmark, and I have been the victim of many a racism, so I know what it's like. um, yeah, I'll do some drops.
Please
There's some
do.
videos and some studies
Are
and
you
stuff.
planning to get back to streaming anytime soon? Going to do more content? Maybe make some YouTube videos
I
or
was
something?
I was considering doing YouTube, but I'm super busy. I actually I work with in video games for a living, so I
Ooh,
make video games and stuff. So
anyone I've heard of?
not yet, but maybe in the future.
I'll cross my fingers. I like video
Yeah,
games. Mm. Decory is asking you where you're originally from. Do you feel comfortable answering that?
yeah. I'm from Bosnia.
Okay, yeah,
Uh,
there you go.
yeah, my family had to leave during the Bosnian genocide, so not a good time. Refugees. I actually did an interview with 𝕾𝖍𝖎𝖙 about it a long time
Interesting.
ago.
I mean, I've never been a refugee, right? So I can imagine that there were some challenges and things. But it looks like you're on your feet, right? At least.
Yeah, for sure.
So I'm glad that you and your family were able to get to somewhere safe and less fraught, if you will.
Yes, for sure.
Where can people find you if they want to find you?
On Twitter, I guess. I mean, I was considering doing YouTube for a while, but it's kind of like I after doing politics, I think I did the politics thing for like a year and a half maybe. I came to the conclusion that what I actually liked the best about politics is actually just informing myself and getting smarter on it and like figuring out like what are my actual positions. Like when I started out talking politics online, I didn't know the difference between a socialist, a communist. I didn't know the difference between a Democrat and a liberal. I didn't know like what did conservative mean, what did like all these things I didn't know. Right. So I became a lot smarter. I started reading a bunch of politics, economics, all those things. And that's what I actually liked about it. Right. I like
Okay,
talking to people.
yeah,
I like getting smarter, but like I'm not a streamer kind of person. Um like yeah.
not a
That's not
streamer kind of. What does that mean? What do you mean, streamer kind of
I,
person? What
I
do you mean?
I don't enjoy. I guess maybe I'm very introverted like that. Like I don't enjoy having like a community and a chat, like stuff
Chat's
like
the
that, and just
worst.
like interacting. Like
Man,
like
interact every time I have to interact with chat, I die inside just a little, right? I'd
yeah
like to abuse them a little bit. It makes me feel a little bit better. But yeah,
yeah.
chat, oh man.
Like and it seems like being a streamer, it's pretty cool. It's a cool job. Like I don't. But I don't envy you, right? I see what it does to people, right? With the mental and stuff like that. You have to be strong with like the haters and stuff.
Oh
And
yeah.
like it wasn't it isn't like a way to go for me. I did consider YouTube. I think that would be way more up my alley, but it's just very time consuming. And I think the type of content that I would want to do on YouTube would be like the very time consuming stuff, like the 1 hour videos, or like very study and stuff, and not as much like the reactions and stuff like that. So
Oh, yeah, no, I get you. Like reactions are the lowest form of content. No shade to the react streamers out there, but come on, gang. Like I don't know, right? If I wanted to, I don't understand people who like watching react content, right? There's a lot of
yeah,
people
I
who
don't.
do, but they like to watch a guy watch another guy,
Yeah,
basically. And
I don't get it.
me neither.
And
It's weird.
like when I don't get a type of content, like I don't actually watch streams either. Like mostly, like I
Sure.
watch your YouTube. Like I'm subscribed to your YouTube and I watch like the videos and stuff like when there's content, but I don't actually watch streams because it's just not content for me. Like I
Yeah.
don't like the hours long just like stream of consciousness things. I like more the
A lot of people will engage with my content that way. They won't watch it live, but they'll watch it during the day. They'll at work or whatever. They'll play either a debate I host or
yeah,
something like
exactly.
that. So yeah, no, I get it. But I wanted to thank you for coming on. I wanted to thank you for taking time out of your day. I know that the Twitter conversation was a little contentious, but I don't think Twitter is good for conversations. I like the more face-to-face stuff. So I do
Yeah, for
appreciate you
sure.
being able to come on and kind of elucidate your positions and help me understand a little bit better what you mean when you say open borders. But for
And,
now,
and to be fair,
please.
I think what most people mean when they say open borders is just a lot more immigration. Right? I think there's like a degree to that, right? And like we can get down to that. I think that's the gist of it, right? Or it's like or you could say as much immigration as humanly possible. Right? I think that's generally what people mean. I haven't and I was, and again, I don't know if something new has happened in the past like 2 or 3 years, but like back when I was on that topic and like doing the debates and stuff, like I don't remember anybody talking about no borders at all, right? People are always very big on the security, especially like a bunch of the people who argue for this also libertarians, right? And they
Hmm.
don't like the no security stuff as well. So checks and stuff at the border. That's always been a part of it. So I don't
Well,
know.
I know that when I'm talking, because I live in a very red area in Pennsylvania, right, in America. So it's a lot of Republicans around me, a lot of conservatives and things like that. When they talk about open borders, they mean a substantively different thing than when you talk about open borders, right?
Really?
They
And what do
do.
they mean?
Um, what they imagine opening borders to be is no border control at all. And
It's
so
like
that
no
means
people, like nobody, like there's
it's
nothing.
just
It's just
opening it up, opening the door, right? That's what the words mean, right? Open
there's
the
no
door, let
but
people in.
there's no people there to like.
That's what they imagine.
Okay, well,
Like
I
whether
haven't.
it's
I
true or
guess
not, that's what when they hear someone say
sure.
open
Yeah,
border,
I don't
that's what
agree with
they
that.
hear. I understand that, and that's why it's frustrating to me because again, you're using words that mean a very specific thing to you, but mean a very specific thing to someone else, a
Sure.
different specific thing to someone else. And I think a lot of miscommunication in politics, especially, happens because we insist on using our terminology and not speaking the language of those we are interacting with. If I'm
Yeah,
interacting with a
I hate that.
Republican, I speak very, very differently. And I use different words, terminologies, and labels than I do when I'm speaking with a lefty or a liberal or something else, right? So I think that's a big failure in messaging in a lot of spaces. Did you just send me something?
Yes, I sent you a video. I think
Oh, I'll check it out. Reason
this guy
TV.
is
Okay.
yeah, it's 20 minutes. I think it's really good. Summarizes a lot of the things that I talked about, and I think I agree pretty much with this guy.
I'll have to
Um,
check it out. No, but
yeah,
thanks again for coming. $10 from Honkler, 303. I love watching you live so I can yell at you in real time. I love taking your money, sir. But for now, we're gonna let you go, Dario. Thank you
sure.
again for coming, and we'll
Oh,
have
and
everything. Oh, please.
if you ever have super interesting topics, do reach out.
I will.
I think the thing that I like the most about this thing is just talking to people face to
Sure.
face, and getting deep into issues. Because I don't like I also don't like the Twitter thing. That's why I stopped doing it. So
Wise. But yeah, no, I'll definitely keep you in mind and reach out. I do tend to start at 6 usually, but we made an exception for you, so um,
it's all
we
good.
might do that again.
I can do it sometimes. My rule is
Hmm.
if it's something that I think is really interesting and like I am curious about, then I'll do the
Well, what
I'll make the
topics are
sacrifice.
currently very interesting to you? I'm always looking for topic ideas.
Um, I think it would be super interesting to talk about to have like a meeting of the minds between progressives and conservatives in terms of like how do we actually move the country forward and like how do we get stuff done, right? Like if Trump
That's
wins,
a
if Biden
huge
wins.
topic, man. Like that's like so broad. What do you mean?
Yeah, yeah. So my issue is when I watch people talk about this online, right? And I watch the YouTubes, right? And like mostly people, even if people try and bridge this topic, usually what it ends out with is, oh, the other side is just so unreasonable and like literally Hitler, so they have to do whatever. Like progressives say that about Trump, and like conservatives say that about, and like it might be true, right? I mean, I do think Trump is very bad, right? But that doesn't change the fact that somehow not just the US, but like in the entire world needs to move forward politically and deal with the big issues of the future, right? Like AI, like the global economy, the wars happening, right? Like so many big things, and it just seems like there's no way to deal with it unless there's like some path forward. So like a good faith um like a good faith attempt to figure out how do we bridge a gap that doesn't just evolve into other side bad, I think would be interesting.
Man, look, I think so too. The problem is that doesn't sell. And that is, we could talk about the incentive structures of these spaces, because that
Sure.
the most views I get aren't from those productive conversations. It's
No,
when
I mean,
things go wrong.
I agree with that.
Yeah.
I agree with that, right? And that's also why it's the Twitch, right? I mean, it's the you
Yeah.
got to do the content, but that's what I want to see, right?
I get you.
I want to see productive conversations where we don't quibble about who has using the right word, right? Who has the right to use a word a kind of way, right? But we actually talk about the ideas, right? How do we do something? Is it actually good, right?
Yeah. Okay. This is our time, and I will see you later, buddy. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
What a nice gentleman. Let me give the link to our next guest. Click the link, accept the rules, jump backstage. It's at the top of the Discord, and I pull you in. Okay, I've given the instructions to our next guest. Did you guys enjoy that conversation, by the way? I enjoyed that conversation. I thought it was very enlightening, if you will. The Mayor McCheese, don't you think saying things broad strokes such as the left calls everybody Hitler and Nazis doesn't mean anything anymore? Only benefits a bag holds the neo-Nazis? No, you can post links here, Dario. I asked you to post links here. Post links here. I think it's worth noting that a certain segment of people, and it's not just on the left, it's just people, and this is almost apolitical, right? Simply broad brush everyone that they don't like. And it is a growing portion of the population that is doing this, and it is a very vocal portion of the population that's doing this, and it is leading to what I like to call reciprocal radicalization, where both sides use more and more extreme language to paint the other as bad, and you push each other further and further and further apart. I do think it's a big issue. So I don't necessarily disagree with your assertion that painting the left in such broad strokes is probably bad. But what I am saying is that there is a portion of all political movements that do this, and that is bad, and we can't sweep it under the rug. We can't pretend that it doesn't exist, right? It's something that we have to talk about and we have to discuss because it's an actual problem. See, this is okay. You got me going. Okay, because this is something that annoys me. It frustrates me to no end when everyone wants us to just not see a thing that is happening before our eyes. We're not supposed to talk about it. We're not supposed to address it. We're not supposed to engage with it because doing so would be bad and help the other team, quote unquote. I don't know what to tell you, right? Like, if I see something that is happening and I feel a certain way about it, I'm going to engage with it. I'm not going to hold back or not touch it or pretend it doesn't exist because it's inconvenient to pretend it exists for certain actors. I am going to engage with it, right? There was a recent thing that happened that got the internet in a tizzy. The Osama letter reading, right? The letter to America. That it was a TikTok trend. Then someone noticed the TikTok trend, talked about the TikTok trend, and the TikTok trend went even higher. So, in many people's minds, they said things like, oh, see, talking about it just made it more widespread. Talking about it just made it worse. But what's the ask here? What is actually the advocacy here? If we see something getting 2 million, I want to be clear, 2 million impressions or something, are we supposed to just pretend it's not there? are we supposed to just not talk about it, especially if it's important or if it's something we care about? Are we supposed to just ignore it? I reject that wholeheartedly. Um, I think that things should be dragged, kicking and screaming into the light and exposed. Sunlight is the best disinfectant. And yes, even if it circulates to a wider audience than it otherwise would, that's good because more people can see how foolish and silly it is. More people can see and recognize that this is a thing that is happening that needs to be addressed. If we try to push it into the darkness, not only will it not work, right? It won't get rid of the problem. It will also make the problem even worse. It will get what's a more extremified, I guess is the best word to put it, because it's kept out of the light. We kept from addressing it, and then it'll just come out of nowhere and hit us like a freight train because we've all buried our heads in the sand and we haven't been able to talk about it at all. Where is my next guest before I rant too much? You're on the Twitch server? Why are you on the Twitch server? Dude, come in my Discord. Here. Hit the Discord. Click the button. Click the link. Okay. And I am going to accept the rules and then jump backstage and I'll pull you in and you can talk to us. Because I can't talk to you on Twitch. I want you in front of me. Right? So join the server, buddy. Join the server so we can talk. Because I want to talk about culture and geopolitics with you. You had a very good pitch to me about this, and I'm very eager to pick your brains on how the cultures involved impact a conflict. So whether that be Israel-Palestine, Russia-Ukraine, it also impacts how we all talk about it, right? It's very easy to tell who the Westerners are and I include myself in this, right? When they talk about a conflict that is not Western, right? It's very easy to say these things. Jesus, or am I having a boomer on? I might be. I don't know. I really hope that they can. We might, Liberal Cluck. If we can't get this guy, after we get this guy on, I'm going to open it up. How do I accept the... Okay. You joined the Discord. How do you accept the rules? What's your handle? I'll just add the rule to you. You should just... There should be an emote. You just click the emote. It's my face. It looks like my face on the rules. You click that emote, and it should assign you the role that you need. Oh, why is this so hard? Why do people have such troubles? Let's see, server settings, members. Yeah, go there. Search by username Culture Mania. It says you have the role, dude. You're in here. You were in here 9 days ago. Yeah, I don't know what to tell you. You should just be able to click backstage. It's in the Discord. It's at the very top of the Discord. Yeah, it should work just fine, man. Here, let me send you the invite again. Because you're all rolled up. Have the role you need. Just jump in and we can talk. Oh my god. Please, please, please. Please let this work. Why is this such a problem? Oh no. Yeah, you're here. Look, I'm losing viewers because everyone's bored because they're just hearing me talk. And there's a lock on the back. Yeah, there he is. Oh, thank God. Hello. Hello.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes. Awesome. Do you have a camera for us?
I do.
Maybe.
All right. Wait, is it working?
It's got the little spinny
Okay.
things. It's trying to load.
All
Are you
right, it'll
using it
start
with
working
another
soon.
program?
I hope. In the meantime, I'll tell you that I really enjoyed the previous discussion, and I
Yeah.
think this discussion hopefully will blend in seamlessly with the talk about open borders. And I also found myself answering vicariously through you the exact answers that I would have given. And I also think that the discussion about open borders and the discussion about cultural conflicts is basically the same discussion, just from a different angle. Because I think no one would ever have a problem with immigration if it weren't for cultural, the ways cultures affect each other and converge negatively sometimes.
Hmm. Um, I appreciate the word. Oh, we can see
Oh,
you.
there we are. See, so
It's
I am a
working.
boomer. Now everyone can tell.
It's okay. So yeah, you slid in my DMs the other day and you pitched something that I thought was very interesting, and you kind of gave away the game a little bit about there, but you wanted to talk about the role that the culture is playing in the Middle East, right? In the conflict within Israel Palestine, and probably in geopolitics in general. That you wanted to kind of extend this to, and I was
Yeah,
very curious on your thoughts there. Could you please tell everyone who you are, what you do, what your expertise is, and kind of just give us a general gist of what you're trying to get across here today? Go ahead.
sure. So first of all, thank you for having me on. It's a pleasure, and I've been watching you and enjoying your content, and I think you have some of the most honest and authentic conversations and thoughtful about a lot of topics that I see other streamers talk about, kind of uh, very much on the surface level. And so I really appreciate you having me on. Um, yeah, I need to apologize. English is not my first language, so if I misspeak or mishear
That's
or
fine.
misunderstand, feel free to call me out. I'll go by my handle, Culture Media, because that's my passion. Um, I studied linguistics and media and sociology, and the convergence of all these three fields is what leads me to this conversation and these opinions. I will have to address my biases. Okay, as you can probably tell by my thick, sexy accent, I am Israeli. I live in Israel. I have lived also for an extended period of time in the U.S., in Latin America, and in Europe. And I used to have a radio show in Israel about culture.
Oh, cool.
Probably not nobody has ever heard of it. Um, but yeah, I'll try to be as impartial as I can.
Sure.
I am not going to talk about the conflict directly because I think it has been talked about ad nauseum by everyone. And we have a saying that everyone has an anus. I don't know if I can use that word online, but everyone has an anus and an opinion on how to solve the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, and what comes out is pretty much of the same value. So I don't think anyone cares what I think about that, but I do want to talk about the discourse itself because I think
Please.
you can have your own opinion, but you need to understand how conflicts work. And I think, give you the bottom line, all conflicts are cultural conflicts.
Well, I guess
Anything other than that,
yeah,
yeah,
if I may just interject at this point, right?
sure,
I think maybe we need to talk about what culture is,
yeah,
because a lot of people, just like a lot of people have different ideas of what open borders is, a lot of people have different ideas of what culture is. So, in your
right,
opinion, as you use the term, what is culture, sir?
right. So what you said to the previous speaker, you said I'm not gonna involve any theory, and I'm gonna be as short, as concise as I possibly can, and explain it in terms that a 5-year-old can understand. Culture, if you boil down any culture, it could be Western culture, it could be biker culture, it could be Texan culture. You boil it down, it's basically a hierarchy of values. It's a priority. Everything you do, everything we all do in our cultures, and we're all affected by multiple cultures at any given time. it boils down to the choices we make in life and our perspective, and that leads us to our perspectives. What is more important than what, and how do we prioritize every aspect of our lives? In very, very basic terms, culture has two pillars. Okay, one pillar is texts. Text can be poems, movies, articles, books, you name it, anything that can carry content. And the other pillar is customs, whatever you wear, you eat, the way you speak, etc. And the way culture affects a society, which is the other part that we need to discuss. A society is not a group of individuals. Like a society is a context, or a culture is a context in which a group of individuals act. So I'll give you a kind of an analogy. We all navigate through life with, let's say, small magnetic compasses, all right? And if you know how a magnetic compass works, it aligns itself with the magnetic fields around it. And at any given moment, we are surrounded by multiple magnetic fields. Some are stronger, some are weaker, some come from the earth, some come from a power station nearby, some come from the phones in our pocket. So people, humans, navigate through life with our compasses that lead us to our decisions, and these compasses are affected by the context, which is the culture around us. We are all cultural, to paraphrase Shrek, we are cultural onions. We have layers of culture that surround us, and they eventually lead us to every decision that we make. And we look at conflicts, when we look at conflicts between societies, because conflicts can also be between leaders, and in that case, the people involved are completely disinterested. But when you see a conflict between two cultures, it is a conflict of priorities that is based on the different pillars of culture that are different texts, different customs. And another thing that's important to mention is that culture, we absorb culture from our surroundings and not from our previous generations, which is a big misconception.
So
Because
let me ask about that, because again, when I hear people talk about culture normally just on the street and stuff like things, and this plays out a little bit in the data, right? That who you vote for is largely a product of who your parents voted for, right? What religion you are is largely a product of what religion your parents are, right? Like, so when we talk about this generational thing, that it doesn't come through generations, sell me on that, because my instinct, my uneducated opinion on this is that we are raised into our culture by our parents or our guardians, right?
So think of two edge cases, which are the majority of cases in this case. Someone who is raised by their parents in an environment where everybody else looks like their parents and acts like their parents, and then contrast that with someone who is, let's say, born to, I'm just going to give an example, first generation Indian, like from India, Indian parents in the US. Just like people develop the accent of their neighbors and not of their parents, if you move to a city that is very liberal, if you yourself don't become a liberal, your kids will probably become a liberal. Because you might, let's say if you move when you're 40, you have already absorbed all the culture that you can when you grew up and you formed your opinions. But when you grow up in a culture, you absorb it from your surroundings.
So your assertion,
your parents are obviously part of your surroundings.
So first of all, thank you for the bits and subs in the chat right now. We have a hype train going, so the more you give, the more you get. Like, you'll get some cool emotes if we complete this. So if you're thinking of gifting subs and gifting bits, now's the time. But to ask the question, so it sounds like you're asserting that the cultural influence that your parents have, or the people who raise you have, is much, much less than the cultural influence of your greater surrounding and community as a whole. That the community that you grow up in has a bigger influence on your culture than your parents do. Is that basically what you're saying?
I think it's a little bit oversimplifying it. I think there are
Maybe.
it depends on I mean, it depends on what aspect of culture, because obviously there are some things that you discuss with your parents that you don't tend to discuss with your peers. I'll give you the most basic example is food. Okay, people when they grow up, they tend to eat more with their parents than they do with their parents' friends or with other people. So they tend to have the aspects of culture that are that have to do with food. They absorb them from their parents. Um, I'll give you an example. When I grew up, my parents took me to Chinese restaurants. I'm just saying this because I saw you eat with the chopsticks. My parents are obviously not Chinese, but we went to Chinese restaurants a lot. Exactly. My wife grew up just like me, the same place, but her parents never took her to Chinese restaurants. So she doesn't know how to eat with chopsticks. So there are some aspects that you learn directly from your parents, and there are some aspects that your parents guide you towards your
So
surroundings, and then you learn from your surroundings. And there are some
this
things that
is
you don't interact with your parents about.
I'm struggling right now. Not with your explanations. I think they're great. But I'm trying to think of how to talk about the topic that we come here to discuss today without talking about it through the Israeli-Palestinian lens. Because when we talk about cultures in conflict, I think that is almost a perfect example of
Yeah,
cultural values coming into direct conflict. And so, if you have a better example, or if another example you'd wish to use, by all means. I'm just trying to think of a way to kind of tackle this because I want to discuss this idea of cultures in conflict and um, how that manifests itself
mm,
between different, either within a country itself. Like in America, we have cultures in conflict, right? It's not
mm,
bloodshed in most cases, but there are values of the rural versus the urban cultures and communities that we have that are right now in very like dire conflict. But then you would look at Palestine and Israel, cultures in almost diametrically opposed to each other that are causing this. So I guess I'm just struggling how to not make this just another Israel Palestine discussion. Does that make sense?
yeah. So I'll do my best to talk about the cultures of the belligerents without talking about the conflict itself.
Mm.
Okay, and I think anyone can make after that. Everyone can make their own assumptions on how the conflict plays out. But I'll tell you what I see when people who are Westerners, what I think Westerners don't understand about the conflict. And
Oh,
I think the
please
reason they
do.
don't understand.
Yeah.
All right. So I think there's the three things that I think Westerners misunderstand. Number one is there is an obsession over details and incidents, and which causes missing the forest for the trees. People often reduce what is probably the most complicated conflict of our lifetime to a an endless stream of incidents, as if they're trying to piece together a puzzle with infinite pieces and find the exactly who said what in what year and what bus exploded where in the month of June in 1974, and they miss the overall trajectory of the pattern. That's the first mistake. The second mistake is that people have warped perspectives on culture and its implications because they are using their own cultural lens and their own priorities as if anyone else has the same priorities, but they are
What's the
just
worst example you've seen of Westerners on this discourse, right? Of me. Let's use me as an example. What lens have I used that you've noticed, or maybe streamers around me or guests I've had on that has been indicative of this problem that you mentioned, where Westerners lack the cultural lenses to properly interpret what is going on.
okay. So I don't want to disrespect anyone, but I heard you had a conversation with a streamer. I think his name was Lycan.
Lycan, yes, Lycan. We're calling you out
Lycan.
right here. We're
Yeah.
gonna disrespect you. Go ahead.
No disrespect, but I think he is a quintessential example of a Westerner that is, for lack of a better term, obsessing over the details and the minutia of the conflict, trying to piece together as if it were like a connect the dots, and not understanding where these events, these incidents come from culturally. And I think it's a representative of, for example, Westerners making the mistake of listening to what people say instead of watching what they do. I'll give you another example.
Please.
So people mentioned, this is a classic example, okay? People mentioned that the Israeli Minister of Defense used the term human animals when referring to Hamas or the Palestinians, right? The translation of the term human animal, what he said in Hebrew is 𝕾𝖎𝖙 𝖙, which the translation is accurate. It does mean literally human animals. But the term 𝕾𝖎𝖙 𝖙, as it is used in Hebrew, has a completely different meaning. So I'll give you an example. In America, as if it were in American English. I don't know if I can use the B word.
Anything that's not a racial slur you can use, or
no.
a sexual
Okay.
slur. Yeah.
So let's say I talk about an American politician. Let's call her Jane Doe, and I say Jane Doe is a bitch. Okay. That I don't mean it literally. I don't mean that she is a female dog. I mean a word. She's nasty, she's unpleasant, I don't know, something like that. But if I were to use another term that Americans are unfamiliar with, okay, if I had said something like, she is a donkey, she is an elephant, or she is whatever, then it would be automatically misconstrued because it doesn't exist in American culture as a colloquial idiom, and so people will immediately load it with much more meaning than it naturally has. And so that's an example of not understanding how different expressions they translate, but they don't. The meaning doesn't translate.
Interesting. Okay, so it's like
a very simplistic example.
No,
I'll give
no.
you
I mean,
another
that's...
example.
Go on.
So another example is, and I'm sorry for only giving examples on the Israeli side, but this is the thing that I remember. Again, with Yoav Gallant, because he's just such a tool that there's so many examples with him. When he said that Israel is giving the people of Gaza 24 hours to move from the north to the south, then a lot of streamers and a lot of people on YouTube said 24 hours is not enough time. And let me tell you a joke, okay, if I may. A guy who lived in the US, Israel, and France dies, and he was a bad guy, so he goes to hell. And the devil asks him, we have 3 hells. Which hell do you want? We have American hell, we have French hell, and we have Israeli hell. And he says, okay, what's the difference? He says, the devil says, in American hell, you watch Marvel movies all day, there's monster truck shows, you eat cheeseburger, you eat pizza, you drink Mountain Dew, but every day at midnight, they put your entire body in boiling water. Okay, what's French hell? Well, French hell, you watch classic movies in black and white, you smoke, you drink wine, you eat cheese, you talk about philosophy, and every day, at midnight, they put your entire body in boiling water. What is Israeli hell? You're stuck in traffic all day, everybody shouts, it's hot, nobody's nice, everything's expensive, and every day they put your entire body in boiling water. And so he says, I'll choose Israeli hell. And the devil asks him why, and he says, well, it's not, I know it's Israel, it's not every day, it's not boiling water, it's not going to be my entire body, so it's better this way. And the moral of the story here is that as Israelis, we know that he didn't mean 24 hours. It's because in the Middle East, you don't say 24 hours and mean 24 hours. You say 24 hours and you mean sometime in the near future. It could be 3 days, it could be 4 days, whatever. And anyone who lives in the Middle East automatically understands that 24 hours is like as soon as possible. But it's a period of time anywhere between 24 hours and let's say 3 or 4 days. That's one of the examples. And I think in every, that's the examples that I have like off the top of my head. I think at every single junction of the conflict, there's something that's lost in translation, either literally, conceptually, technically, whatever you want.
So
that's
no, that's fascinating, honestly, and it tracks, right? Even within American cultures, right? We can have big differences in translation of what something means, and that is a problem in communication in general. I guess my ask here though is what is the advocacy that you're getting at here? Given that I am not from the region, I've never been to the region. I only have a passing understanding of the region. Um, but this is a conflict that does affect me, right? It
Mhm.
America is supporting Israel financially, right? There are people within my circle who are from Israel or from Palestine who have been personally affected, and that has downstream effects on me and how I interact with them. So, given that I don't have the lens to properly interpret some of these things, what what should I do or what should someone do? Because it's hard to not use one's own lens to look at a thing. And I wonder, right? Um is it ever appropriate in your mind to just say that cultural lens is in a it just doesn't matter. My culture is better than yours, and so we're going to use my culture to make judgments on you, right? Like in a lot of more less developed nations, let's say, they have very what I would consider backwards views on relations with when it comes to women. Right? They're not allowed to drive. They're not allowed to vote. They're not allowed to do all these things. Right? In Iran specifically, they have to wear these hijabs and things like that. And if they don't do it correctly, they get killed, like literally beaten to death. Um, I don't care if that's their culture, to be honest with you. I don't give a shit if that's their culture. That's wrong, and I think it should change. Does that make sense?
It makes perfect sense. In fact, that's the solution, if you ask me, because you can talk about cultures being equal all you want, and that's perfectly fine from the viewpoint of an academic classroom. But in the real world, cultures collide, and it's down to the last man standing. So you either take a side and you say, okay, obviously, in some ethereal, imaginary world, all cultures are equal, and that is a way to look at it. But in the real world, when these cultures collide, we have to choose a side. It's impossible to stay on the fence. That's one thing. The first thing you asked is how do you adjust for your own cultural lens, and I think the best way is just to become aware of it, and to look for the grand narratives and not miss the forest for the trees. If you look at things like not historic events, but historic trajectories, and you're trying to look for the reasons that, or the forces that pull these trajectories in a certain direction, then you might be able to understand where this society is going. Okay, but if you obsess over details, who said what at what year, well, these don't necessarily give you the big picture. Okay, I think generally speaking, anything that has a sample size of less than 1,000, you can just do away with. It's probably misleading. And then you look at like larger trajectories. Where are these things going? And that usually cancel out a lot of the misconceptions that people have about culture. And the second thing is you need to understand that if you notice a priority in what people do repeatedly, it might point to a different hierarchy of values. And then you need to understand their point of view through that hierarchy of values, even if for you it means it doesn't work with your personal cultural lens. I don't know if
So
that makes any
I
sense.
think I know what you're saying, but does that not come in conflict with the idea that some cultures we can understand them, but they just should be rejected. Let me ask you this, perhaps. Um, when it comes to the Middle East and that region as a whole, what are some of the common cultural conflicts that occur, and how do they manifest within the region? Not just within Israel Palestine, but in the region as a whole. I don't know how versed you are in these things, but I'm curious what someone who lives in the area sees as the common cause of some of these conflicts. Like I've heard, right? One of the things that has been said a lot is that this isn't really a religious conflict. And I don't know if that's true. Because it seems to me that religion is almost at the heart of a lot of what's going on, or it has informed the culture, right, of these two groups that are basically killing each other right now. And so I think it's almost impossible to ignore. But I'm curious your opinion on this, please.
The only way I can really answer that is to give you like a short explanation on how these cultures are structured. And I'm hoping that if I do that, you will understand like also the role of religion and how different priorities come into play. So I don't know. Let's just start with Palestinian culture because I think it's the most misunderstood.
Okay, please.
And the reason I think it's most misunderstood is because I bet most Americans have never heard a Palestinian from Palestine, or at least they've heard many more Israelis from Israel speaking than they've heard Palestinians from Palestine. Not talking about people like 𝕾𝖍𝖎𝖙, who has never set foot in Palestine, but like actual Palestinians speak.
Yep. I tried just real quick on that. I had an Israel panel a while ago, and I wanted to have a Palestine panel too. And so I put out some feelers. I can't find anyone that's like lives in the region, right? Probably obviously so because of what's going on right now, but it's like even people who have only like who lived in the region for a time and are now in the US, they're so hard to find and get a hold of. I have a lot of people who are from like Jordan or from Yemen or from surrounding areas, but that's not Palestine, right? That's a different thing. But anyway.
That's different, and if they didn't grow up there, then they wouldn't be able to give you an accurate description of the culture.
Yeah.
So let's give you like a very, very brief and like bird's eye view on Palestinian culture. There are three important spheres of influence on Palestinian culture. The first is, as you mentioned, is religion. And religiously, Palestinians are much more monolithic than most of the cultures that Americans have ever interacted with. Okay? 95% of Palestinians are Sunni Muslim, and of the 5% that are Christians, the majority of them do not live in Palestine. They live abroad. And so when you grow up in a culture that is practically 97% of a certain religion, even if you do not practice that religion zealously, okay, then you're still very much influenced by the teachings of that religion. Now, I don't need to go too deep into Islam, because probably people are aware of it, but let's just say that there are Islam tends to lend itself easily to several interpretations that are less than tolerant towards non-Muslim. And that's the largest sphere of influence, because that's the largest community that Palestinians are part of. And then within that, there's a smaller sphere, which is Arab culture. Most Muslims are not Arab. Only about 17% of Muslims are Arab. And Arab culture is very interesting because it's very, very different from Western cultures in pretty much every aspect of familial life.
Give us some examples on that, if you will.
Okay, so if you look at any culture around the world, and you dig deep enough to try and understand what makes people tick in that culture, you will eventually hit the point where geography and the area, the physical area where that culture originates from, dictates the choices they make. Okay, if you've ever read a book called Guns, Germs, and Steel, it's probably the most famous book about that, and hundreds of books in sociology and
I
anthropology
actually
and
have read
evolutionary
that one,
psychology.
by the way, gang. It's there's a lot of people who are big mad at it, right? Like it's contentious, if you will, at least in Western academia.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's a pretty foundational, or at least it was foundational for a while. But go on.
You can contend the details,
Hmm.
but the idea that people are forged by their peoples, like a group of peoples, are forged by their environment, I think that should go without saying. And so if you look at Arab culture, and when I say Arab culture, I mean the people who live in the northern Sahara, the Levant, and the Arab Peninsula, who are not Bedouins or Berbers or nomadic tribes. Nomadic tribes like Bedouin and Berbers are separate culture. But the people who live sedentary lifestyles, okay, people who are agrarian or pastoralists and live in the deserts, have a different set of values because of the scarcity of water, which is probably the most basic thing you can think of. If you live in a desert and you find an oasis or a well, I'm talking thousands of years ago, you find an oasis or a well or a stream or some other source of water, you hold on to that for dear life. Because if you're kicked off that land, that means death to you and to your entire bloodline. If someone kicks you off your land in ancient Germany or ancient Scotland, you have a bruised ego. 5 or 10 miles down any direction, you'll find another source of water and you'll be able to irrigate your crops and feed your livestock and hunt for animals. But that's not the case for people who live in the desert. By the way, in this case, a lot of the things that I say are also true for the ancient Israelites, because they also grew up in the same area. And so you see that when land, which is the source of water, becomes so important, two things happen. Number one is land becomes sanctified in a way that it never was sanctified in the West. So the most sacred places, for example, in Islam, the most sacred place, the Kaaba in Mecca, is next to a few feet next or a few yards next to one of the most important prehistoric wells in Saudi Arabia, and the Zamzam well. And that's not by coincidence. It's because land carries a very different meaning if you grow up where land that holds water is so scarce. The other thing that happens is that the familial structure changes, because you need a very tight-knit family to preserve the land that you live in. And so in Arab culture, there's something called an endogamic clan, okay, which means that you live together with your brothers and sometimes your cousins and their wives, and you live in a big family. And another thing that happens a lot throughout the Arabic world is there's a lot of consanguineous marriages, okay, because of the idea that you want to keep a very tight-knit family and not break the family apart, so that in times of need, everyone is together. And if you walk into an Arab village in Israel, even in Israel, the more traditional Arab villages, you will see that the architecture is very different. They live in not multifamilial houses, but megafamilial houses, big houses with multiple generations and multiple, let's say, it's not a generation because it's in the same generation, but multi families. Let's say in America, you would say, yeah,
cousins, distant
exactly,
cousins, etc.
exactly. And if you compare that to the emphasis on the nuclear family in America, so in America and in Europe, when you have a family, when you get married, you branch out of your original nuclear family, and now you have your nuclear family, you have your own bloodline. And if, God forbid, something happened to your offspring, that would sever your individual bloodline. If you live in a let's say, branched family, like the endogamic clans, then there's not one branch of the family that can be cut off, and the family will not be able to continue its bloodline. And so this idea is like a common thread throughout a lot of places this is why there are royal families in the Arabic world, and they are very large royal families. Okay, like the royal family in Windsor Castle are maybe like a handful of people. The royal Saudi family is a very large family, and so every area in Palestine is controlled by one. In Arabic, it's called Khamula.
Yeah.
It's a big family, and that creates a lot of
So how
like a
is
different set of
yeah, how is his? I'm sorry to interrupt. $2 from Testicle Johnson. Do you think cultures should stick to their own? We're gonna get to that, but I think that um, the question I have, like, because you mentioned these three spheres. We talked about the Islamic sphere that the Palestinian culture is in. We're now talking about the Arabic sphere. What was the third sphere? Just again, because we have
the
limited time.
the
So.
sphere of the Palestinian sphere, Palestinian as Palestinian national identity, which is different from their identity as Arabs and as Muslims.
Sure. How are all these things impacting how they have dealt with Israel, past, present, and future, right? Like, because again, and correct me if I'm wrong, but from a Western perspective, we look at this and this seems like a forever war, basically. That this is something that has been going on before I was born, and before most people were born, and we see it's not getting better. It's in fact, if anything, getting a little worse. And we look at polls from the region, we look at opinions from the region. Most Palestinians want to just fight to the death, basically, right? They are in favor of armed conflict with Israel. That's at least the latest poll I've read, right? Most of them aren't in favor of a two-state solution. They free Palestine is what they want, right? So how does the culture, I guess, I'm trying to connect these things. How does the culture, right, and the differences between the culture play into this?
Let me ask you a question.
Please.
Okay? As a Jew, I have to answer a question with a question. But it is the answer. Say you are now king of the Palestinians, okay? And they adore you to death. They'll do whatever you want. Okay, you have the support of every single Palestinian in existence, and you are offered this deal. Okay, the deal is you get a land on 80 or 90% of the area that is contested. Okay, the West Bank and Gaza. You get to establish your own gubernatorial establishments and offices and everything you want. You get to govern yourself. You have your own flag and I don't know, Ministry of Education, whatever you need. And in addition to that, you get to be neighbors and have economic trade with the biggest economic powerhouse in the Middle East, and you will also be protected by the biggest and the most ferocious military in the region. Okay. You can just do whatever you want with your people just to prosper and succeed and build a better life for everyone. Do you take that deal?
Yeah, so why not?
I'll tell you what, most Westerners would take that deal. But this is where culture comes into play.
Okay.
Palestinians would not take that deal because, or most Palestinians, or at least the Palestinians that I have spoken to,
sure.
and everything that I've seen in the past, I don't know how many years this conflict has been alive. Because I'm going to say something that I mean it with the most, the utmost respect. This is not something that I'm saying to bash at Palestinians. The idea of economic prosper and becoming independent and conducting your own civil life is much less important than the idea of getting even and doing right by your grandparents. Okay, so you might say, in a way, and I'm trying to say this in the most non-judgmental way, some cultures In some cultures, you owe your dead grandparents more than you owe your unborn grandchildren. So the idea of giving up the right of return and giving up the entirety of the land of Palestine is an insult to previous generations of Palestinians, and it is worth sacrificing the prosperity of future generations to not commit that insult. And that is a cultural difference that sometimes Westerners cannot grasp.
That that tracks. The idea, right, that it would be a shame or dishonor to your family, right? I know a lot of Asian cultures have this. Chinese culture has this. Japanese culture has this of honoring the ones that came before, not bringing shame, death before dishonor type of deal, right?
Yes.
And it does seem, and I'm not, please forgive me if I'm misspeaking here because I'm not by any means an expert on any of the cultures at play here. But honor culture, at least from what I see in Iran, is huge. And they have honor killings all the time, right? Like where someone in the family does shame to the family, and so they go in, they kill them, right? Um,
Mhm.
yeah, I can see absolutely why that would be a problem. Um, I guess my question, I'll just put it bluntly, because I think that that value is bad. I'm going to be real with you. I think it's wrong. It's a value that honors the dead over the living, and I think it's a shame. So how do we change that? How do we fix this problem? Because I think it is a problem.
Mhm. So here's the crux of the matter, right? Because I thought we would take more time to get it, but you get things fast. So if we understand that basically different cultures see different things and in ways that are sometimes completely contradictory. To be perfectly honest, this conflict will not end until one or both of the cultures change. And so the discourse has to be about how do we change the cultures, not how do we give people what they want, because they'll never be satisfied with what they want. That'll never happen. But how do we change the way people think? And if we
Well,
go back to
let's start with Israel then. How do we change it? Because we talked about Palestinian culture and the obstacles there.
yeah,
I also want to talk about the culture in Israel and some of the obstacles you see with an Israeli culture that is
mhm,
preventing a peaceful solution, if you will. Can you talk on
yeah,
that for before we get too far down the road,
yeah.
right? Because I want to address both, and we've talked about the Palestinian culture, the obstacles there. Let's talk about the Israeli culture and some of the obstacles that you see
Sure.
from that direction.
So Israeli culture is going to be much easier for Americans to understand because Israeli culture pretty much mimics American culture, at least in the past 20, 30 years. So the one thing you need to understand is that most Israelis, they see themselves as Westerners. And that, even though that sphere is beginning to crack because of the current discourse. But in Israel, I'll give you just a few examples. We're big on the the Eurovision Song Contest. And whenever an American franchise opens here in Israel, like, I don't know, Wendy's or KFC, people jubilate because it means that we're getting closer to America. Israelis move to America, Americans move to Israel, we watch Marvel movies, where we take after America in many, many ways. But beneath that, we also take after America in one other thing. If you had asked me to describe Israeli culture 30 years ago or 40 years ago, I would say that it is a 10-dimensional framework of your religious adherence and your denomination and your ethnic background and your socioeconomic status and like a million other things that somehow converge into your identity. But in the past 20 years, there is the one thing that divides people in Israel is they are either on the left side of the political sphere or the political spectrum or the right side. And the definitions of left and right are extremely flexible. They are basically are you pro-Netanyahu or anti-Netanyahu? Because Netanyahu has been prime minister for the better part of the last 20 years and has completely divided the country. And so you need to, if you're looking into Israeli culture, you need to understand that there are factions in Israel that are the most extreme. And because of this divide, like straight down the middle, they are grouped to other factions that are much more mild. But as all extremes do, they pull in the direction of that extremity. So I'll give you and this has a lot to do with how Israeli culture, Israeli society changed since about the 1970s and became misaligned with the parliamentary system. Okay? I'll give you like a short explanation.
Yeah,
In
because
Israel, we don't have
I
a
mean,
president.
just from what you said, like, that mimics a lot of the divide we see in the West, right? At least in America, like
Yeah.
we are getting more and more politically radicalized in a lot of ways, right? More and more politically divided. It's split us in ways that culturally, right? Like there is a very real budding of a new culture on the left and a new culture on the right that are separating from the major American culture overall. So I can see a lot of parallels in what you're saying with the Netanyahu divide. But please go on.
So take this as a cautionary tale. Since our cultures are very similar, you can see what would happen to the US if you decide to adopt a unicameral parliamentary system. A unicameral parliamentary system worked well in Israel from the late 1940s up until about the 1970s, something like that. Because if you were a secular Ashkenazi Jew who lives in a big city and has a white-collar job and left-leaning fiscal policies, you would vote for a party of people who look, act, and think like you. And if you were a Mizrahi Jew who lives in the rural areas, has a blue-collar profession, and you are more religious, you would vote for a party of people who look like you. And the parliament would look like the public in terms of who is represented and in what percentages. But because Israel is such a small place, around about the 1960s or 1970s, people started to mix. People moved from the city to the outskirts of the city or back. People became more religious, less religious. The friendships developed. People intermarriages developed, and people became a multitude of identities. And multitudes of identities are not represented well in parliamentary politics. You need to choose. Eventually, you have one vote, and you need to choose one group of people, and that gives way to. It pretty much evens out the center. So in Israel, the most of the parties in the center have the exact same platform. The Labour Party, which is on the left, and the Likud Party, officially in their platform, are very similar. If you would move them, like pluck them out of Israel and put them in the US, they would both be kind of in the center, maybe a little bit towards the Democratic side.
The Likud
Not
Party?
really sure.
Okay, maybe I'm just misinformed. But I've heard some really wild shit come out of the Likud Party. I'm not gonna lie to you.
You've heard it from the people of the Likud.
I mean, look, from their statements, like I think they had for a while, like they wanted a greater Israel, right? You've seen the maps that they posted, right? They've also talked about how they want to just basically remove the Palestinians entirely. I mean,
Yeah.
is that
So
incorrect?
that's the
Am I
same Likud
misinformed?
party. That you're not misinformed, but that is the same Likud party that signed the peace agreement with Egypt, and that is the same Likud party, not exactly the same, but these are the same people who disengaged from Gaza, and Netanyahu himself, at times, expressed support for the two-state solution. For example, in his Bar-Ilan address, and stopped the building of new settlements under the pressure of President Obama, and then backtracked and increased the settlements, because the difference, the Likud does not have a coherent set of principles that is predominantly right wing. It is a very flexible, play by ear set of principles that could go either way. And what happens in such a parliamentary system is that it rewards the segments of the population that are very uniform and they're not layered. So, for example, the ultra orthodox, okay, they have their own political parties. They're very uniform. If you're an ultra orthodox, you're just an ultra orthodox. All your friends are ultra orthodox. You only marry ultra orthodox. You almost do not engage with people who are outside of your cultural sphere. And the same is true for the settlers, or at least the religious settlers. They are very much secluded in their own worlds, interact mostly with their own kind, and so the parliamentary system rewards them for having their own party that they vote for, because they don't have any other place to vote. Everyone else can afford to be political nomads, but those who cannot afford to be political nomads become actually stronger. So what happens is that these parties pull the centrist parties towards the extreme. And lately, this is exactly what happened. So what I'm saying, like in broad cultural strokes, if you look at Israeli politics, you need to understand that it has been hijacked by extremists because of the political system, and the majority of not only Israelis, but the majority of Israeli politicians are wishy-washy. They could go either way. If tomorrow there was a leader that wanted a two-state solution, they would probably vote for it. Most of them. Not the extremists, okay? The extremists, they're done for, okay? But for the most part, there is no line that you can draw down the middle and say that on the right side is those who oppose a two-state solution, and on the left side, it varies, it fluctuates all the time. There are those who are definitely vehemently opposed for religious reasons, and they are on the right. I believe personally that their power is dwindling, but if I want to understand them culturally, I need to understand that for them it is a matter of life and death. They will never give up the idea of owning the entirety of the land of Israel.
So it seems to me that what you're saying is that in Palestine, it was the biggest obstacle is the honor. Like, it would be a shame to the ancestors, right? They would be bringing shame and throwing away the sacrifices that Palestinians who've come before them have made for the land, for the people, for their things. So
not only that, it would actually mean they have to relinquish their national identity.
Yes.
Because the national identity in Palestine of Palestinians, because okay, let's ask like a question: why are Palestinians not Jordanians? What is the difference between being Palestinian, culturally speaking?
I don't think the Jordanians let them in. I think that they don't give them citizenship.
No, but culturally speaking, why are Palestinians not Jordanians?
Different set of experiences that have happened to them, etc.
Yeah, but would you say that North Carolinians are a different people than South Carolinians? Obviously, they have different customs are different. They have different experience. But would you say that someone from Raleigh marrying someone from Columbus, that's an intercultural marriage?
No.
So I'm going to give you the answer. I think that Palestinians, the idea of Palestinian national identity, and this is not something that I think is contentious, nor should it be. Mm-hmm. The idea of Palestinian national identity is not cultural based. Because if you want it to be cultural based, you would have to point out aspects of Palestinian culture that are ubiquitous, unique, and meaningful from their surroundings. Unique meaning that things that only Palestinians do, and Jordanians and Egyptians, for example, do not do. Okay, so we'd say, okay, Palestinians eat falafel. Okay, but Egyptians eat falafel, and also Jordanians, Lebanese, and hell, even Israelis eat falafel. That is not unique. if you find something that is unique, let's say something that's done only in Gaza or only in Nablus or only in Qalqilia, that is not ubiquitous. And when you find something that is ubiquitous and unique, you have to make it meaningful. So let's say, okay, only all Palestinians and only Palestinians eat makluba. And all Palestinians and only Palestinians wear the black and white fishnet keffiyeh and not the red fishnet keffiyeh like the Jordanians. So now your argument has to be, are those elements of the culture, do they suffice to distinguish a Palestinian culture as a different set of cultures, different culture, then...
Give us an example of an Israeli ubiquitous, unique, and meaningful cultural thing that they do. What is an example of Israeli culture that is ubiquitous, unique, and meaningful?
So one thing you could, first of all, Israelis, I'll preface by saying this. There's nothing wrong with creating a culture from scratch. Israeli culture was created almost from scratch. But so was Australian culture and Argentinian culture and a lot of other cultures. So there's nothing wrong with that. If you look at Israelis, apart from the language that we use, not just the language itself, but the way we use language. If you look at the way our streets are constructed, the architecture in Israel is very unique. If you look at the kind of shows, the kind of media we have, okay? These are things that they're very deep in the sense of how cultural, not just, not giving you like minutiae, because that would be easy for me to say that we're the only ones who eat kugel and we're the only ones who did this and that. But I'm saying there are a lot of, because we had, as an Israelis, the privilege of establishing our own cultural infrastructure, we had the time and the means to create these cultural contexts that make us unique. Probably in June 1948, if you asked me what makes Israeli culture unique, I would say nothing. Just a bunch of people who call themselves Israeli. Okay? But over time, that develops. But for that to develop, you need cultural infrastructure. You need the means. You need to create media. You need to create, I don't know. And also, Israeli culture draws a lot from the common Jewish experience. So even though most Israelis are secular and are not religiously observant, a lot of the things that we do and a lot of our cultural knowledge comes from Judaism. So, for example, take me for example. I do not observe any religious duty, probably, not even one. But I have the cultural knowledge. I know all the holidays. I speak the language, so to speak, okay, of what I can talk to another Jew even if they have a completely different ethnic experience than I do. And that's something that was built up, on that was something
you don't think
that the Israeli culture was built upon. Palestinians have it on the base of being Arab, but the separation between Arab and Palestinian only started a few decades ago.
Sure, it's in development, right? Just Israel is in development.
I'll tell you more than that. If you ask me today, there is definitely a Palestinian culture. Definitely exists. It's not that they're
because it sounds like you were arguing the opposite of that. And maybe this is just an ESL thing, right? So.
No. Okay, so thank you for pointing that out. No. Yeah. There is definitely a Palestinian culture.
Okay.
A society.
Because we were all getting a different thing from that. Okay.
Yeah.
Because I was like, what do you mean there's not a Palestinian? But go ahead.
You cannot become a people without something some elements that your culture will coalesce around. Okay? The question is, what are these elements? Where do they come from? So for example, if you give enough time, you will develop a culture in Australia that comes from the land of Australia. They wear the hats and they wear the clothes that fit the climate in Australia. That becomes part of their culture. Then they eat the food that they find in their culture, etc., etc. Look at Israel. It comes from early Zionists, which is based on European nationalism and a little bit of socialism and a little bit of Judaism. You mix that all up and it comes up in what and you let it rise, and that's how you get Israeli culture. And when you have a Palestinian culture, then there is Arab culture, which is a big part, probably the biggest part of a Palestinian culture. And then within it, two things. One are these things that you might find that are unique, ubiquitous, and meaningful. And the other thing is the narrative. And that narrative is the narrative of the Nakba. If you've probably heard that word.
Yeah, I'm familiar.
So, right. So that is a narrative that came in through the void left by the lack of time that it took to develop a cohesive, congruent Palestinian culture. Okay, so I'm not saying that there's no such thing as Palestinian culture. I'm saying that because there was not enough time and not enough of the cultural instruments, because for the most of the time that we know Palestinians, they did not have their own media, they did not have their own governments, their own systems. They still don't have many of the instruments that people need to develop a unique culture. And what came, so that void sucked in the narrative of the Nakba. And the narrative of the Nakba is very similar to the narrative of the Exodus from Egypt that the Jews have, right?
Yes.
You will ask a Jew, which, by the way,
right?
history probably debunks the myth of the Exodus from Egypt, but that doesn't even matter. It doesn't matter because a Jew from France and a Jew from Saudi Arabia, I don't know, they have that narrative in their mind that they can bond over, and that narrative doesn't have to be true.
Stories, yeah.
It's deeper. A narrative is deeper than a story, because you don't even have to believe a narrative. You have to. It's like the difference between knowing and understanding. You know. So the idea of the Nakba is that it brings all Palestinians together, and in its base, the Nakba is a story of being wronged by the Israelis and wanting to get back.
So
that's the most basic interpretation.
Let's kind of bring this, I guess, to the subject at hand. It's fascinating stuff, but like I said, we do have a limited amount of time tonight. Two questions for you. First one, right? Given that these cultures are in other cultures are continuously in conflict, do you think it makes sense? Well, what do you think of multiculturalism as an idea?
That depends on what you mean by multiculturalism.
So the mixing of cultures. So like in America, we have, I think a great example of multiculturalism is that we have like widely different cultures, immigrants coming in with their own cultures, and they live side by side with the overall overarching American culture. Now you can argue that in and of itself is part of the larger culture of America, but there are definitely cultural groups within America that are intermingling, always around each other, and some might argue that that is a source of a lot of the conflict and a lot of the violence that erupts in America is these things. So I guess what is your thoughts on, should cultures remain homogenous or should they remain separate, or should they try to intermingle? What would you be your advocacy here?
Well, my opinion and my also the way I see it, like rationally, is that superficially multiculturalism is a wonderful thing. I want to live in a place where I can eat Chinese food next to a sushi place, next to a taco truck, next to a halal food stand. That's what I want superficially to enjoy multiculturalism. But as you pointed out, the unwritten agreement in the United States is when you naturalize as a United States citizen, or when you come to the U.S. to work, you abandon certain values that you held in your previous culture, and you adopt lay of the land. For example, you have to work for a living. You cannot ask for handouts. Maybe, okay, that's part of American culture. You have to be a capitalist, at least to a certain degree. You cannot come in and want to establish your own little communist party in Utah.
You could try in Utah.
You could try.
That'd be a trick.
Maybe
But
Utah, yeah, okay. You probably, but not in Austin, Texas. There's some unwritten rules, and as people adhere to these rules, they can keep their customs. They can keep their whatever, their food and their dances and their music and everything. The problem is that sometimes these things are linked, and they're linked conceptually before they are linked physically. So sometimes you would see someone, let's say, you would see someone wearing a hijab in the streets of Houston. And what you would think as an American, what an American might think is, since this individual is not willing to forego their attire and the superficial parts of their culture, they might not be prepared to relinquish their more deeper aspects of culture. So the idea of multiculturalism, you cannot talk about multiculturalism unless you do some sort of layer separation. I think most people, at least most people that I would like to have a conversation with, do not have any problem with the superficial parts of multiculturalism. I think that is great. I think if you can find someone that you have something in common with, it doesn't matter how they cook their rice.
Sure.
But deeper parts of multiculturalism might converge, and they might contradict. And in those cases, multiculturalism, it does not work because some things are mutually exclusive. And of course, these things are rare, but they do occur.
Let me ask, right? When it comes to changing the culture, because there's two questions, remember? When it comes to changing the culture in the Israel-Palestine conflict in and of itself, well, I said two questions, but I have two questions within this question. One, do you think that what Israel is doing now is in helping or impeding that? And two, regardless of the answer to that question, what should the people of Israel and Palestine be doing to change their values in a way that would be more conducive to not killing each other all the time?
So this is where I have to give an answer that is painful. It's painful to say, and it's painful to hear. You cannot change the culture fundamentally unless you are willing to at least in some degrees change it superficially. And I'm answering your second question first. And so what both Israelis and Palestinians need to do, and I think this is what I talked about, that I want the discourse to change. I think this is the discourse that I would like to hear from the West and from America. I would like that Americans pressure Israel and pressure Palestinians to change some fundamental aspects of their culture in order for there to be a sustainable, viable solution. Such as, for example, changing the media we consume, changing Palestinian familial structures, changing the relationship between church and state in Israel, changing the relationship between settlers and non-settlers in Israel. And these are things that Americans could actually do because they have done it in the past. What was your first question?
Yeah, that was my second. Well, my first question was, how do you think that
if it's impeded or not?
Is an impeding impediment, like, because I can see the answer both ways, right? Like, I could see it being something where you're eliminating the thought leaders, Hamas and things like that, and that will lead to perhaps a change, or it could simply be causing people to dig their heels in. This is just another shared narrative of Israel is coming in and killing us, and they can't be trusted, and so it could just reinforce some of their cultural beliefs, right, towards Israel. I don't know the answer. I'm curious what your thoughts are.
I'll give you my best answer. I think, if I'm completely honest, I think what Israel is doing right now is not. It's actually progressing the solution, but if I'm honest, what Israel will probably do right after will be impeding to the solution.
Can you elaborate on that?
Okay, yeah. So the elimination of radical groups such as Hamas, but not only Hamas, also the PLO and the Palestinian Authority is a good thing, because these two groups have been.
Oh, so you're advocating for the elimination of the Palestinian Authority as well?
I wouldn't say eliminating,
Okay.
but there definitely has to
Dismantling?
be a change, because dismantling or inducing some sort of change,
Okay.
or either a structural change or personal changing the people, because in the past, I don't know how many years that the Palestinian organization, has been existing, it has done, regardless of the crap that Israel has been doing, they have done not many good things to the Palestinian people. And if you ask most Palestinians, they will say that they are corrupt, they are weak, and they do not have the support of the Palestinian populace. And so replacing them with someone else might give a chance to a leader that is able to negotiate with Israel, and also actually represents the Palestinian people. That's the first thing I think that is a good idea. Why I don't think that'll happen? Again, because the cultural change needs to be much deeper, and because Israel does not have the incentive to do it because of the cultural shifts in Israel. So these two trains run on parallel tracks, and they have to happen. It doesn't matter if they happen simultaneously or one after the other, but there are two very different cultural changes that have to happen, and they will be painful. And they will be painful for both sides. They have to be painful. They have to induce shame, and they have to inflict pain for people to denounce and renounce their own cultures. It's not an easy thing to do. You need to control what people consume. You need to change economic incentives in such a way that it is absolutely painful for someone, and that's the only way to bring about change in culture.
That's a tall order, especially in today's society. Like even getting America to apply these pressures to both groups is going to be a tall order. I do think that Biden is putting pressure, at least on Netanyahu, to change a few things, right? I think that I would credit, at least in part, and to by no means all the credit, obviously, but Biden pressuring for the exchange of hostages, I think, is a good example. Maybe that's not a cultural pressure, but it's something that I think that goes to your point where America has put pressures in the past. 25 PLN. I don't. What's a PLN? From Pixels to say multiculturalism is masochism of the West and a failed attempt of the left to deconservatize society. Failed because it revitalized nationalism. But oh, it's Polish. Okay, I don't know how much that translates. But I guess yeah. Do you mentioned America putting pressures like this on Israel and Palestine, and you've mentioned they've done this before. What would be the first step? What should I, as an American voter, be asking Biden to do today? Specifically, not just put pressure to change, right? Like specifically.
Specifically, stop the settlements. That's the first thing.
Okay. I'm down.
First thing,
down
and I think that will lead. Here's the thing, and I think a lot of Americans are unaware of how insignificant and yet at the same time significant the settlers are. The settlers are what, like 5% of the Israeli population, and that doesn't even include how many of them are just the economic settlers and not ideologues. And so there are very, like, in terms of numbers, there are a very small percentage, but they are very loud, and they are rewarded by the lopsided parliamentary system that we have. But at the same time, because they're so small, pressure can be applied to them, and or pressure can be applied to the majority, and then by that, Israel has 3 or 4 different ministers, and with their entire offices that have to do with basically turning people into more religious. And the reason for that is because the natural way is that people become less religious in Israel. Israel is a very urban society. It is a very multicultural society. It is a very liberal society. So even just removing these three offices will put Israel back on the right track. That's just a tiny little example. So if people stop moving into the settlements, the economic incentive will shift from the settlements, because I think most people who move to the settlements do that because of economic incentive. And once you stop the economic incentives, you shift, like the stock market, you shift the entire economic system to other places, and it takes its own course. And so that should be the discourse. I'll tell you one thing that I've been afraid to say, but
don't worry, I'll protect
October
you.
7th. Sure.
No, don't be afraid to say it. Say it.
In the grand scheme of things, looking at things on the cultural level, the October 7th attack, as horrible as they were, are meaningless. They do not change almost anything. And even the Israeli retaliation probably will not change anything. If you look at the grand scheme of like what's been happening in the past 50 years, this is another blip in the radar. It doesn't change like the overall trajectory of where things are going. And I think, we can meet again like a year from now, and you will say, okay, if nothing has been done to change the culture, we will be exactly at the same place where we started. Maybe it won't be Hamas, it'll be another organization. Maybe it won't be Netanyahu, it'll be someone else. These are just instruments. They're not, they're inconsequential, again, in the grand scheme. So what I'm saying by looking at the conflict culturally is dismissing these individual events, even though it's hard to say, because they're very tumultuous, and they stir a lot of emotions when you hear what happened to people and the hostages and the bombings and everything. But again, look at it culturally. Look at how these two cultures are moving like two tectonic plates in the region, and it'll paint a very different picture.
Okay, I mean, I don't know. I would argue that 9/11 for America made fundamental changes in the course of how we dealt with foreign policy. I don't know if it maps on entirely to Israel, right? Because you've had other attacks. But as far as I know, none so egregious, at least not since like the wars, right? None so egregious as October 7th. I could be wrong. So it's hard for me to say that it's not going to change anything, right? But I admit I am not connected to the culture like you are, and so that might just be like an American-ish kind of way of looking at it. But for me,
let me ask you this question. Sorry, I interrupted. What stops another bin Laden after 9/11?
We went in and we basically like people think like we didn't win we absolutely won the war on terror. Like we did some bad things when it came to Iraq. We probably shouldn't have invaded there. But yeah, we won the war on terror. We dismantled the organizations, Al Qaeda, ISIS, etc. Along with our Muslim armies who did the same, right? Who went and shot them in the head, right? But yeah, we won the war on terror. That's what stopped another bin Laden, in a large case.
So I'll say this: if you think the war on terror was won, it means that you would agree
for America,
that the culture,
not for all of y'all. All of y'all are just doing your thing. But
no, for America, So let's simplify things. There was a culture that wanted to harm America. They succeeded in that, and then America's retaliation changed the scene in such a way that that culture will not attempt or does not even want to harm America ever again.
Well, no, they do want to still. We just removed the tools that they had to do so. We took the power away that they. So maybe in the future, maybe 50 from years from now, or when circumstances change, fair enough. But at least for the time being, right, for the nominal future, we've took away their teeth. We've defanged them.
I'll tell you what. That's a plausible argument,
Mm.
and I think that's kind of what Israeli the Ministry of Defense kind of thinks that's going to happen in Gaza. Okay, probably we think that if we hit them hard enough, they will lose the instruments by which they can harm us, and there will be quiet. Maybe not 50 years, but maybe 10 years or 15 years. But personally, I think that the culture has not changed, and I think the war on terror. I cannot say that it was won, because even though you removed the instruments, like how long did it take from when the US pulled its forces from Afghanistan until the Taliban took over? Like minutes.
Sure. Yes,
or
but
hours.
the Taliban isn't. So the difference is the Taliban isn't striking at our shores. Like so before, right? The reason why the 9/11 was a big deal is because it hit us at home. Because there's been conflicts throughout American history overseas. We've had bombings, the USS Cole, right, and other terror attacks offshore. But it was the fact that it happened in our home that made us respond how we did. And I think that was the goal of the war on terror, was to remove their ability to hit us at home. And again, there's reasonable concerns that we have with other groups that have been, threatening our security. China, for example, and other countries. But I think that when it comes to Al Qaeda, ISIS, etc., we've largely removed like Afghanistan is dealing with Afghanistan right now. They're busy, right? They're busy trying to pick up the pieces and survive. They don't have time or the ability to strike us, if that makes sense. And maybe that's a little America-centric for you, but I think it's just absolutely true.
No, that's fine. It's probably me misunderstanding an American conflict, since I am not American and I see things from my own.
Well, a lot of Americans misunderstand it too, so it's not just you.
Yeah, but I will say something that you pointed out, which I think is probably the best solution. What you said is that Afghanistan is dealing with Afghanistan, okay? And I think the only solution to terrorism is to treat it like a disease. The way to treat a disease is not to kill the patient, but to help the patient have an immune system. So the problem of the conflict between Israel and Palestine is that Palestine does not have the immune system to weed out terrorists and terrorist cells and terrorist organizations and terrorist ideology on its own. That is a cultural shift on many, many levels. On the gubernatorial level, on the personal level, on the familial level. It's a huge shift, because if you if you live in America and your neighbor is a terrorist, you will rat him out. But that's not necessarily the case in every culture. Okay? Probably of the 2 million people who live in Gaza, let's say 75% of them know someone who is a member of Hamas. And their cousin, their sister's ex-boyfriend's friend, whatever. And that's a huge cultural shift to ask people to rat out their friends and family, and to develop this kind of immune systems. That's part of the cultural shift that I'm talking about. If that happened, if America could make that happen in another country, 11 time zones removed, then that's a good thing, and it could actually be done in the conflict between Israel and Palestine. And I think as an Israeli, I would say, okay, teach us how to do it.
Sure, I'm with you. I'm absolutely with trying to, as you said, inoculate or give these people an immune system, or these cultures an immune system to deal with some of these things that they lack currently. $5 from 𝕍𝖎 to say, Wick, I told you this before. Asians don't count months or years. We count in decades and centuries. 50 years of defanging is nothing. Maybe, but 𝕵𝖎𝖙𝖘𝖍𝖔𝖜, after I'm gone, if it happens again, okay, I'm gone. It doesn't affect me. And that's a very American way of thinking, too. But I wanted to just kind of, because we are wrapping up here, I wanted to give you a final thought on this subject, on a final plea to the Americans and the Westerners in my audience of how they should be viewing this conflict that they're not doing now. And then tell people where they can find you, right, if they want to find you, and how to get in hold of you if they want to. But go ahead. Final thoughts, final words.
So, what I want to say is that I want to see a change in the discourse that is not blaming on either side. I don't think it makes any sense, mostly because people don't understand what they're blaming people for. And I want to see people steer away from obsessing over details and incidents and events and quotes and figures, and start looking at like overarching narratives and the pressure that needs to be exerted from places like the US and Europe is not to fix small little problems. And when I mean small, it could be like huge in terms of like the people who live here, but to try and fix the way things operate, the way political alliances work, the way cultures are structured. And that is the kind of discourse that I want to hear, that I think will actually be more productive and more conducive to peace, instead of looking for, and I'm going to say something very controversial, there can never be justice in this conflict. We're past that on both sides. Trying to balance out every single event and give every Israeli what they deserve and every Palestinian what they need is at best that is futile, but more likely it causes more harm. We need to completely renounce the idea of having justice and instead look at the conflict as these two parties need to grow up, each one in its own little trajectory, and then peace will come in itself.
No justice for peace, gang. For peace. That is controversial. Thank you for being willing to come on and endure my questions, right? I've learned a lot. I hope my audience has learned a lot. You've given us a lot to think about. If people want to find you, where can they find you?
I'm not, as you could tell by my inability to operate Twitch and stream and whatever, I'm not really online. I opened a YouTube channel. It's Culture Mania. I don't know if I'm going to upload anything over there. I'm thinking about it. And I have an email, which is culturemania01@gmail.com. If you want to talk to me or send me something, that's fine. I might be online sometime. I don't know.
Well, gang, if you want to see him, go to those places. Thank you again for being here. And for now, we're going to send you off. See you later, buddy.
Thank you very much. It was a pleasure.
Pleasure's all mine. What a great guy. What a great discussion. We had 2 great discussions today, gang. What do we got coming up? So, well, first of all, thank you, dear viewers, for all your support. If you've liked this content, hit that like button, hit that subscribe button if you're on YouTube. If you're on Twitch or you're on Kick, hit the follow button. Send me subs, send me bits, send me super chats. All of the things that give me money would really help the channel and would really help me personally. 2 things. Tomorrow, 6 p.m. Eastern, we have a bit of a break from geopolitics. We're going to have an all-woman panel about why men suck. What's the matter with men, gang? And women are coming on to tell us about it and to tell us why we are bad people. Mooncake's going to be there, Lav's going to be there, Seven's going to be there. We have a whole list. It'll be fun. But for now, let's go to Ice Beans and ask her, because Ice Beans going to be on there tomorrow too. Ask her why you're a bad person if you're a man, okay? But for now, we'll see you guys later and tune in tomorrow, 6 p.m. Eastern. Bye-bye.